You wake up, or at least you think you do. Your eyes open, the light in the room looks exactly how it should, dim, soft, morning-like. Your bed holds your weight in just the right way, the air has that subtle texture you've felt 1,000 times before. Maybe you reach for your phone, maybe you sit up, you blink, you breathe, and somewhere, deep in your mind, a quiet verdict is made. This is real now, I'm back. But pause for just a moment. How do you know? No, really, how do you know? Because, here's the strange, unsettling truth. This very feeling of waking up, that familiar sigh of, finally, that dream is over, is one of the easiest illusions for the mind to replicate. And not just in metaphor. I'm talking about literal dreams where you wake up only to find out later you were still dreaming. One layer deeper, then another, and maybe even another. You've likely experienced this, that weird sensation of waking up in your bed, maybe even going through your morning routine, brushing your teeth, checking messages, hearing the shower run, only for something, some strange twist to reveal itself. The clock doesn't read right, a face is wrong, the hallway is too long, and then, boom, you wake up again. And now, you're really awake, or are you? That's the paradox. That's the fracture most people never think to examine. What if every time you think you've reached the end of a dream, you've only stepped into another layer of it? What if the moment you trust your waking state is the moment the dream deepens? This isn't about fantasy. It's not about ghosts or simulations or wild sci-fi tech. It's about the way your brain constructs reality and how deeply it can convince you that an illusion is truth so long as it's believable enough. That's the trick. The dream doesn't need to be flawless, it doesn't have to be airtight, it just has to be good enough that you stop asking questions. Think about it. Most people rely on feelings to validate reality. They say, well, this feels more real, or the dream was weird, but this is normal. But what is normal? Except a story your brain repeats until it becomes unexamined. Dreams can simulate everything, the temperature of a room, the soft resistance of the floor beneath your feet, the scroll of a social media feed, even the emotion of relief when you wake up. And if a dream can create that, what's left to distinguish waking life from it? Here's where it gets truly haunting. The moment your mind believes it's safe, I'm not dreaming anymore, that's when it relaxes. It drops its guard. And in that moment, the illusion has done its job. The dream doesn't need to convince you it's real forever, just long enough for you to stop questioning it. Because questioning is the threat, doubt is dangerous to the illusion, so the system has a failsafe. Comfort, ordinary life, toothbrushes, coffee makers, email alerts, commutes. These little rituals don't just shape your day, they anchor your belief that this right now is the real thing. Not because you proved it, but because you stopped wondering. And the moment you stop wondering, the dream continues. Seamless, quiet, unchallenged. You can even wake up inside a dream and still be dreaming. That's what lucid dreamers encounter all the time. They become aware and dreaming, only to find that the dream responds, it shifts. It doesn't collapse, it adapts. The environment stabilizes, the details sharpen. Suddenly it looks a lot like waking life, realistic, coherent. You might even start thinking, maybe I did wake up. But watch closely. There's always a crack, a mirror that doesn't reflect properly, a digital clock that stutters or melts, a voice that echoes too long, and when that fracture appears, if you catch it, that's the moment you realize you were still inside, still asleep, still wrapped in the next layer. Now ask yourself this: how do you know you've ever truly woken up? What if this, your life, your body, your daily reality, is just one more polished layer of the dream? What if your sigh of relief, okay, I'm back in reality now, has only lulled you deeper? You've already accepted false awakenings before, you've trusted them, you've moved through them believing each was real until something proved it wrong. So what makes you think this one is different? Here's the uncomfortable truth: there's no reliable test, no method that guarantees you're truly awake. Sure, people try, you can flick a light switch, but dreams can simulate electricity. You can read a sentence and check if it changes. But dreams can get that right too. You can feel pain, hold a conversation, even die. And all of it can happen inside a dream. And it feels real. Until it doesn't. That's the ultimate trap. If you can never be completely sure you've woken up, then the entire concept of waking becomes unreliable. It becomes recursive, circular. You wake up, you feel confident, you relax, and then you wonder, and suddenly you're back at the beginning. You blink, you breathe, you start the loop again, because the dream doesn't need you to believe it. It only needs you to stop doubting. Now maybe part of you is resisting this. Maybe a voice in your head is saying, come on, this is overthinking. Obviously I'm awake right now. That voice is part of the design, the defense mechanism. It's the narrative loop that kicks in to keep you anchored. But the fact that you're still listening, still questioning, even if just a little, that means something. It means you haven't let go completely. You're still holding the thread, still tugging gently at the edge of the veil. That thread is awareness, and it's the one thing the dream can't fully control. So the next time you wake up, whether it's tomorrow morning or later today or even right now, don't rush, don't jump up, don't slide into the comfort of routine without hesitation. Before you move, before you speak, ask yourself a quiet question. What if this is still the dream? Not to panic yourself, not to spiral into paranoia, but to remember, to stay lucid, to gently peel back the surface of what you're being shown and ask, is this the end of sleep, or just another layer of it? Because if every dream can contain a false awakening, what makes this one any different? Maybe this is the loop, maybe this is the trap. Or maybe this is your moment of clarity, your opportunity to remember that you're not just the character in the story, you're the witness watching it unfold. And the moment you stop assuming you're awake is the moment you finally start to be. It's 2 a.m, at least. That's what the glowing numbers on the clock say. You blink. Maybe you haven't fallen asleep yet. Maybe you've been lying in bed, caught in that fuzzy, half-conscious space where your thoughts drift just enough to lose shape. But when you look again, it's 3 o'clock dot. A full hour has disappeared. And the strangest part? You didn't move. You didn't doze off. You didn't notice the time pass. It just slipped. It's a quiet violation of something you've always trusted. Time. You've lived your entire life assuming time is solid, linear, forward-moving, anchored in hours and minutes and seconds. It ticks, it flows, it's reliable, it's measurable, and when you look at a clock you expect confirmation, not confusion. But what happens when the measurement stops matching the memory? What happens when you're sure an hour should have taken longer or shorter and it didn't? You felt it. Everyone has. A moment that drags like molasses, a meeting that feels like a lifetime, a vacation week that flashes by in seconds. It's not the clock that changes, it's you. And that tells us something profound. You don't experience time, you construct it. Think about that. Your sense of time isn't a perception of reality. It's a story your mind tells after the fact to make things feel continuous. Time, for your brain, is not a tape recorder. It's not objective. It's a rough sketch. It's patched together using impressions, transitions, emotional tones, and assumptions. You're not actually experiencing every second. You're remembering what mattered, and the rest is filled in with placeholders, like in a dream. Because that's exactly what dreams do. They jump, they skip. You're in one room, then another. You're having a conversation with someone who wasn't there a moment ago. A whole night passes in seconds, or a moment stretches forever, and you never question it while it's happening. Your mind just goes along with it, stitching the gaps into something vaguely coherent. Now let's come back to waking life. How much of your day do you really remember? Not in summary, but in sequence. Can you recall everything that happened between 10 a.m. and noon yesterday? Every step, every glance, every word? Of course not, because most of what you call your day is memory glue, highlights, key points. The rest, it's assumed, it's background, it's fog. You trust the continuity because the clock keeps ticking, but what if the clock doesn't reflect your reality? It replaces it. Here's where things start to bend. In neuroscience, we now know that the brain doesn't process time in real time. It takes chunks of sensory information, millisecond bursts, sometimes longer, and edits them together after they happen. Your present moment isn't actually the present. It's the brain's best guess of what just occurred. In other words, you're always a little behind your own life. Now ask yourself, if your brain can edit time, if it can rearrange moments, skip entire sequences and fill in the gaps without you knowing, then what part of this timeline is real, and what part is just projection? That's the crack in the system. Because once you realize your perception of time is fluid, bendable, editable, you start to notice just how often it fails to line up. You sit down to write for 5 minutes and suddenly it's been an hour. You glance at your phone real quick and a half hour's gone. You drive home and can't remember a single intersection you passed. Where did the time go? You didn't fall asleep, you didn't black out, but the hours disappeared all the same. This is what dreams do, and this is what your waking life does. Seamlessly. Because your mind doesn't care about measuring time, it cares about maintaining a narrative, a sense of order, a feeling of progress, and that feeling, it's fragile. Your sense of time can stretch, compress, or vanish completely depending on one thing: attention. A watched pot really does feel like it never boils. Why? Because your attention slows time down. The more you notice every second, the longer it feels. The less attention you give, the faster time compresses. That means your experience of time isn't anchored by clocks, it's anchored by awareness. And awareness is unstable. It wanders, it drifts, it skips, just like in a dream. So when you stare at the ceiling for what feels like 20 minutes, only to find out it's been 2 hours, was that time real, or was it manufactured by a brain that edits time like film, cutting frames, adding transitions, rearranging sequences to make it all feel right? And if it feels right, how would you know if it is right? That's the horror of it. That you don't. You assume that because the clock kept counting, you must have lived every second. But what if you didn't? What if you missed it? Not because you were unconscious, but because the system deleted it. Quietly, automatically, as a way of smoothing the ride, like in a dream. In dreams we skip constantly, we jump from scene to scene, no one questions the logic until it breaks. That's when the illusion shatters. But here's the real question. How many times in your waking life have you skipped, without noticing? How many stretches of your timeline are made of assumptions? Think of all the gaps, the walks you don't remember, the repeated conversations you can't recall, the dinner you prepared with no memory of chopping the vegetables. You didn't dream those moments, but you also didn't experience them, at least not consciously. Which brings us to the final twist. If time can be bent, skipped, erased, then how can you be sure this timeline you're living in right now is even real? What if your entire day or week or life has been a montage stitched together from fragments, memories, simulations, and what you call reality is just the version that your brain finalized? What if the memories you're carrying right now were written 5 minutes ago? What if this moment, this one right now, is the only real moment you've ever had, and everything else is backstory? Would you know? Could you tell the difference between lived experience and a memory implanted just moments before? Because the system that manages your time perception is invisible to you. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't notify you of edits. It's just trying to keep you calm, focused, asleep. And it works. Because you believe in the clock. You trust the timestamp. You trust continuity. Even though you know that dreams can replicate continuity. That you can wake up with a full set of memories, a full emotional arc from an experience that never happened. You trust the timeline because it feels real, but so does the dream. And that's the paradox. If your waking life can stretch and bend like a dream, if hours can disappear without alarm, if memory can substitute for reality, then how do you know you're not still inside it? Not inside a dream that's obvious or chaotic, but a seamless one. A dream that keeps time perfectly so you don't notice the missing moments. A dream that loops your routine so flawlessly it never gives you a reason to question anything. But now that you're listening, now that you're watching the clock just a little more closely, you start to feel it. That sensation that something slipped, that something isn't quite where it should be, that maybe, just maybe, another minute disappeared when you weren't looking. And the more you feel that, the more you remember you've been here before, not just in dreams, but here, in this life, in this room, watching this moment. Like déjà vu you can't place, a repetition of time that doesn't make sense. Maybe you really are skipping through time. Maybe you're only aware of the scenes your mind allows you to see. Maybe the story is already written and you're just flipping through the highlighted pages. Or maybe you never left the dream at all. And the clock is still counting. But it's not counting up, it's counting down. You wake up in a room that looks exactly the way it should. The curtains hang just right, the light filtering through is soft, a little grey, maybe it's morning. The bed feels familiar, the air carries that faint lived-in scent, and the furniture, well, it's all where it's supposed to be. Nothing feels out of place. But still, something feels off. Not wrong, just misaligned. The bed is a little too wide, the ceiling feels too far away. The room echoes with a kind of familiarity that doesn't fully land. You know this space, you recognize it, but at the same time, it doesn't seem to recognize you. It's like walking into a friend's house that looks almost exactly like yours. The photos on the wall are in the right shape and size, but the faces aren't yours. The carpet feels right underfoot, but the pattern isn't what you remember. You know the layout, but not the origin. And that's when the question surfaces, not loud, not panicked, but persistent. What if this room isn't really mine? What if my life, the walls, the routines, even my thoughts, has been assembled from borrowed pieces? In dreams, this happens all the time. You're in a childhood bedroom that's also your current apartment. The wallpaper is familiar, but you've never seen it before. You walk through your old school, but the doors lead to a hotel lobby. You never question it. Your dream self accepts it, because in the dream, familiarity is enough. And that's the strange rule that also seems to govern waking life. Familiarity isn't proof, it just feels like it. It convinces you that a place is yours, that your surroundings are rooted in your story, that your life is a clear thread stretching back to a beginning. But stop and examine it. Can you remember in full sensory detail how you arrived in this room? Not just that you walked here, but the exact steps, the turning of the knob, the sound of the door, the feel of the floor under your feet, the moment you crossed into this space. No gaps, no edits. Can you recall that? Most people can't. There's always a blur, a mental cut, a dissolve between scenes. You were somewhere, then here. The in-between is gone. And this is the first crack in the illusion, because that cut, that missing transition, is the exact same structure you experience in dreams. You arrive. You don't enter. You appear in a setting that feels right, but you never ask how you got there. You don't question the room. You fit yourself into it. But what if that room wasn't built for you? What if you're simply filling a space meant for someone else? This is what we call the paradox of the borrowed room. The idea that the environments we accept as our own may not belong to us at all. That the life you've slotted yourself into, the personality, the patterns, the preferences, they may not be authentically yours. They may be inherited, absorbed, mimicked. Maybe they were given to you. Maybe they were assigned. Look around. You didn't design the shape of your home. You didn't invent the words in your head. You didn't create the culture that tells you who you are. You awoke into all of it. And slowly, without knowing, you began to call it yours. But what if your environment was never a reflection of your truth, but a container for your amnesia? In dreams, the mind pulls from symbols, bits and fragments of things seen, remembered, forgotten. You'll dream of your grandmother's kitchen, mashed together with a subway station from a movie you saw 15 years ago. The dream doesn't care about logic. It cares about emotional weight, recognition, and this is the unsettling overlap with waking life. Because most of what you call reality isn't direct experience, it's interpretation, it's assumption, it's pattern recognition layered with memory. If I asked you to describe every object in the room right now without looking, could you? Could you draw the exact placement of things on your desk? Could you remember the direction your closet door opens? Or would some of it blur? Because here's what psychology tells us. You don't see everything, you see what you expect to see. Your brain filters information. It fills in gaps, it auto-completes the world. Not because it's lazy, but because it's efficient. It shows you what it thinks you need, and when things fit your expectations, it relaxes. It stops questioning, just like it does in a dream. In fact, the way you perceive your surroundings in waking life is identical to how you perceive them in dreams. The difference? In dreams, you sometimes notice the instability. The mirror warps, the hallway loops, the clock shifts. But in life, the dream is better at hiding. It's more consistent. It doesn't let the seams show. That's why this room, this life, feels like yours. It's been tailored to your expectations. But tailored doesn't mean true. Here's a deeper possibility. What if the entire space you inhabit, your world, your mind, your routines, was built not from who you are, but who you were told to be? Your values, your fears, your aspirations, how many of them are rooted in genuine, independent discovery, and how many were absorbed unconsciously from parents, culture, media, memory? You dream in symbols you never chose. You live in structures you didn't design. You repeat phrases you didn't invent. The question is, who's really the owner of this room? And what if you're the dreamer, but not the architect? Here's where it deepens. Some researchers believe that dreams don't just pull from personal memory but from collective imagery, that your unconscious is plugged into a shared symbolic library built from films, books, voices, patterns across generations, that what you dream might not even be yours in the way you think of ownership. So what if waking life is just as shared, just as layered? What if you're walking through a psychological house built not by your will, but by unconscious repetition? That would mean your room is made of stories you didn't write, and the more you accept them, the more they harden. The walls feel permanent, the layout feels fixed, but it was never yours to begin with. You're borrowing a dream, and the dream is borrowing you. Now look around again. What do you really know about this space? Not just its shape, but its source. Can you truly feel, where you begin and where the borrowed environment ends? Or has the room become so familiar that you forgot to ask? This is the paradox, that you might be living inside someone else's memory, that what you call your life could be a repurposed narrative, filled with second-hand meaning and unconscious roles. And the longer you stay, the more natural it begins to feel. But comfort is not confirmation. Familiarity is not truth. Just because the room hasn't changed doesn't mean it was ever really yours. And if that feeling of misalignment, that quiet sense that something doesn't quite belong, is still whispering to you even now, then maybe it's not just the room that's borrowed. Maybe it's the identity you're wearing inside it. You had a question. It arrived suddenly, sharp, strange, uncomfortable. The kind of thought that doesn't just pass through your mind, it pierces it. It lit up something in you, made your breath catch, made your awareness narrow. For a brief second, it felt important, urgent, like it was about to change something. And then it was gone. Not just lost, erased. You tried to hold on to it, retrace your thoughts, walk back the path you just traveled in your mind. But nothing. It slipped through your fingers like smoke. You were left with the echo of its presence, but not the shape. Like waking up from a dream where you know something mattered, but can't remember what. It vanished. And now you're left wondering, was that just forgetfulness, or was it something else? This is the paradox of the vanishing question. The idea that the thoughts most capable of waking you up, the questions that threaten the dream, are the very ones your mind won't let you keep, because maybe forgetting isn't always an accident. Let's start with what you already know. You forget things all the time. You walk into a room and can't remember why. You have something on the tip of your tongue and it disappears. You wake up from sleep with fragments of a dream that evaporate before your feet hit the floor. But some forgettings feel different. Some vanishings feel intentional, as if something stepped in silently, precisely, and deleted the thought before it could settle, before it could unravel too much. Have you ever felt that? A sense that you were on the edge of a realization, a moment of clarity so close you could almost taste it, and then gone, no trace. Just the vague sensation that something important almost happened. Almost. But almost doesn't count in the dream. In dreams, this is built into the structure. You try to question something, ask where you are, what's going on, and the dream doesn't respond. It distracts. It dissolves. The environment shifts. Someone speaks. A new event starts. Your moment of inquiry is buried. And here's the disturbing part. Waking life sometimes behaves the same way. You start to think too deeply, too honestly, too radically. And suddenly something pulls your attention. A notification buzzes, a thought interrupts. You feel hungry. You forget. The question vanishes. Now maybe that's just how thoughts work. Maybe it's attention span. Maybe it's neurological noise. But what if it's not? What if the mind has a built-in defense mechanism, one designed to protect the dream? Because let's be honest, not every question is dangerous. Most of what you think about is recycled. Habits, worries, narratives. But every so often something different arrives. A question that doesn't fit the script. A question that might break something. Something like, is this who I really am? What if everything I believe was taught to me? What if I'm still dreaming? And then it's gone. You don't delete it consciously, it just disappears, or you remember it later and can't understand why it felt so powerful before. This isn't new. Mystics and philosophers have talked about this for centuries, that true insight, true awakening, often begins with a question, but the mind, which prefers order over truth, will do everything it can to bury that question before it spreads. Why? Because questions are dangerous to systems built on certainty. And your sense of self, your sense of waking reality is a system. It's made of patterns and stories and unchallenged beliefs. And every disruptive question is a crack in the wall. That's what dreams fear most. Not chaos, but awareness. And the first sign of awareness is a question that doesn't resolve, so let's go back to that moment. You remember it now, don't you? That quiet second when something flickered across your mind. It didn't feel like just another thought. It felt like a key, like it might open a door you weren't supposed to see. And then the door disappeared. Now ask yourself, who closed it? Who took the key because you didn't choose to forget? You didn't say, this thought is too important, I'm going to delete it. It vanished on its own, as if the dream itself knew it couldn't allow that thread to be pulled. Because once you start pulling, everything else begins to unravel. It's the same with déjà vu, with strange feelings you can't name, with those moments where the world feels a little too constructed, too smooth, too clean. You start to question, and then the moment passes. And you're back in the loop, back in the role, back in the borrowed room. The vanishing question is how the dream protects itself. It's not just a glitch, it's a strategy. Because here's something strange. In consciousness studies, there's a concept called inattentional amnesia. It means not only do we miss things we weren't focused on, we often forget that we missed them. Our brain doesn't even store the gap. It stores a seamless narrative. And that's terrifying because that means you might have already asked a question that would have changed everything, and it was taken. Not lost, not misplaced, removed, before it could become too loud, before it could wake you up. And so you live inside this loop of near awareness, a carousel of almost insight. The mind lets you wander, but only so far. It lets you question, but only within approved boundaries. You think you're being curious, but your curiosity is being contained. So what do? How do you fight something you can't see? Something that deletes the evidence before you even notice? You slow down. You become still. You hold space for the question, even if it starts to slip. You don't panic. You don't chase it. You wait. Because sometimes the question returns, not because you remembered, but because it was never fully gone. It was buried, and part of you, the quiet part that never sleeps, knows where it's hidden. This is what awakening really is. Not a sudden realization, not fireworks, but the slow, persistent act of remembering the questions you weren't supposed to keep, the ones that poke at your identity, the ones that interrupt the story, the ones that feel like they don't belong, but won't let go. So next time it happens, don't shrug it off, don't rush to replace it with something more manageable, don't reach for your phone or the fridge or the noise. Pause. Trace your mind. Walk backward. Ask yourself, what was I just thinking? What was I on the edge of? And if the thought returns, even as a whisper, listen. Write it down. Speak it aloud. Chase it. Let it unsettle you. Because questions don't vanish for no reason. They vanish because they're keys. And you are closer to the door than you've ever been. You find yourself in a room. You don't remember entering it. You don't know how long you've been here. There's no sense of arrival, just presence, just the here and now. The space is quiet, peaceful even. The lighting is soft, the temperature is neutral. There's nothing to fight, nothing to fear. It's not threatening, but it's not free either. Because as you look around, you realize something unsettling. There's no door, no window, no sign of where this room begins or ends. You tried to retrace your steps, but there are no steps to retrace. You're here. That's it. And somehow, you didn't notice until now. This is the paradox of the room with no exit, the kind of space that doesn't trap you with walls, but with comfort, with familiarity, with just enough freedom that you never think to leave. It's not a prison, it's a lullaby. And the longer you stay, the more natural it feels. You sit down, you adjust, you tell yourself it's fine, that you're just resting, just waiting, that the door is probably there somewhere, you just haven't looked hard enough. Or maybe you don't need the door right now, maybe later. But time passes, thought loops, the world stops changing, and still, no exit. This is how dreams work. You're dropped into a scene. No origin, no entry point. You just are. You rarely question it. You adapt. You move around inside the environment, responding to its logic, even if that logic is surreal. You don't ask, how did I get here? You ask, what do I do next? And in waking life, it's often the same. You inherit a life. You inherit a name, a role, a structure. You accept the room you were born into, the systems, the beliefs, the boundaries. You don't remember choosing them. You just appear within them. And most of the time you don't ask if there's a way out, because you didn't notice you were inside anything to begin with. The dream doesn't lock the door, it just makes you forget to look for it. Now think about your day, your routines, your thoughts. How often do you question the architecture of your experience? Not just what you're doing, but what's shaping what you're doing, your preferences, your goals, your patterns. Where did they come from? Did you build them from scratch, or did they just arrive? And if they arrived unchallenged, then how do you know they're yours? The room with no exit is not always a place. It's a structure of mind, a perceptual box that makes the world feel complete, so you don't notice its edges. Those edges, that's where freedom begins. But the dream doesn't want you near them. It would rather you stay in the middle, where it's safe, predictable, where things make just enough sense to keep you from pacing the walls. Because here's what happens if you do start looking. You walk the perimeter. You press on the boundaries. You look for the seam, the crack, the doorframe that shouldn't be there, and you find nothing. It's just more of the same, a space that seems navigable but loops back on itself, like walking down a hallway and ending up in the same spot, like changing your thoughts, only to realize they're wearing the same disguise, like trying to break a habit and finding it has no beginning. That's when you start to feel it, not panic, not yet, but unease. The suspicion that you're not as free as you thought. Because if there's no door, then the room is the world, and you never left it, not since you arrived here, whenever that was. This isn't just metaphor, it's how most people live. You think you're navigating life, making progress, choosing paths, but how much of it is repetition? How many of your thoughts are echoes? How many of your feelings are reactions to something ancient inside you? You tell yourself you're free because the room is wide, but you've never touched the wall. So how do you know? This is the quiet horror of the paradox. Not that you're trapped, but that you never even looked, and why would you? The room rewards you for staying. Every comfort reinforces the dream. Every task distracts you. Every minor success, every social script, every just one more thing gives you another reason not to ask, is there more than this? The dream doesn't need chains. It just needs your participation. And it has it, because you were trained to love the room. From birth you were taught its rules, what matters, what doesn't, what's possible, what's not. You were told where to sit, how to think, what success means, what a life should look like. And you didn't question it, because everyone else was in the same room. That's the trick. The dream makes the room social. If everyone agrees, it must be real. But agreement isn't truth. Consensus isn't freedom. It's just shared sleep. So how do you get out? How do you leave a room with no door? You don't. You wake up. Because the room was never physical. It was a thought pattern, a narrative, a boundary you never saw, because it was inside you. And waking up doesn't mean running away. It means seeing it. It means recognizing the loop, the sameness, the design. Because the moment you see the room, it starts to dissolve. That's the escape, not through rebellion, not through destruction, through awareness. But awareness is painful because it shows you what you've accepted without consent. It shows you where you handed over your choices, where you stopped asking. It shows you that maybe the room was never built to keep you inside. Maybe you were built to forget there was anything outside, and maybe that forgetting is what the dream feeds on. So ask yourself, where are the walls of your life? Where does your awareness stop? What parts of your identity have never been questioned, because those are the corners of the room, and if you start pressing on them, you might find they're not as solid as they seemed. You might find the walls bend. You might find the door was never missing, it was just made of silence, of stillness, of the question you stopped asking. So, if you're feeling the itch, the sense that something here doesn't quite fit, that's the signal. It's not that you're trapped, it's that you're remembering. And every time you remember, the dream loses power. Because a dream only holds you if you think it's the world. But now, you've seen the walls, and once you've seen them, you can't unsee them. That's how the room begins to crack. That's how the exit reveals itself, not as a door, but as awareness. You remember it clearly. Not as a faint impression or a vague sensation, but as something real, something lived, the moment, the texture, the emotion. It sits in your body like truth. Your stomach tightens, your chest flutters, your eyes hesitate. It feels like a memory. But here's the problem. It never happened. You can't explain why you remember it. There are no photos, no witnesses, no proof. Sometimes you think maybe you dreamed it. Maybe it came from a movie. Maybe it's just a feeling without a source. But it's there, rooted, echoing, familiar in a way you can't rationalize. This is the paradox of remembering what never happened. The moment your mind serves you an experience with emotional weight and narrative detail, only for you to realize it doesn't belong anywhere in your timeline. And once you've felt it, the question becomes impossible to ignore. If a memory can feel real without being real, how much of your past can you trust? Let's begin with dreams. In dreams you can live an entire life. You can fall in love, grieve a stranger, return to a childhood home that never existed. And, in the moment, it all feels legitimate. You don't question the relationships, the histories, the architecture of the world you're inside. You accept the memory because it feels real. The emotional data is enough to convince you of context. You don't say, wait, this relationship doesn't have a backstory. You say, this feels familiar, so it must be mine. But then you wake up, and the truth is clear. None of it happened. So what do you do with that? You dismiss it. You write it off as fantasy. You shake your head and say, wow, that was intense, and then move on. But now apply that same logic to waking life. How many of your memories were constructed the same way? Not out of experience, but out of emotion. Let's go deeper. Neuroscience has shown that memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, your brain rewrites. It adds, subtracts, smooths, edits. It borrows from imagination. It mixes dreams and reality. It reinterprets based on who you are now, not who you were then. You think you're recalling the past, but you're rebuilding it every time. And worse, each rebuild overwrites the last. Which means, the more you remember something, the less likely it is to be accurate. You're not storing the moment. You're storing the version of the story that your current self can emotionally accept. So what happens when that story includes things that never occurred? Simple. You remember them anyway. Not as lies, not as fantasies, but as truths. And sometimes those false memories are more vivid than the real ones. Think about it. Do you remember every day of your childhood? Of course not. But you remember the few stories that were repeated. You remember the feeling of a moment that might not have happened. You remember the scene, not because you lived it, but because it fits your emotional narrative. That's how memory works. It doesn't care about what happened, it cares about what makes sense. Now, go one step further. What if some of your most vivid memories, the ones that shaped you, never happened at all? What if the heartbreak you carry, the trauma you relive, the love you cherish, what if those were built from fragments of other people's stories? From films, books, passing remarks, ancestral echoes. What if your memory is less like a journal, and more like a dream that wrote itself using whatever pieces were nearby? Suddenly your past becomes uncertain, not in a paranoid way, in a liberating one. Because if your memories are flexible, then so is your identity. If your history is a construction, then so is your pain. And that's what the dream doesn't want you to realize, that even your past, especially your past, might be part of the illusion. You were taught to believe memory equals truth, that because you remember it, it must have happened. But now you're seeing the cracks. The dream doesn't just simulate the present, it simulates the past. It gives you context to hold you in place. It surrounds you with stories that feel earned, with wounds that feel ancient, with fears that feel justified. But maybe they aren't yours. Maybe you never lived them. Maybe you adopted them because they fit. Because they reinforce the person the dream needs you to be. A character is more believable with backstory. So the dream provides one. And you believe it because it hurts, because it moves you, because your body responds. But your body responds to dreams too. You've woken up crying. You've felt grief in your chest for people who never existed. You've felt longing for faces you've never seen before. Your biology doesn't distinguish real from remembered, or remembered from imagined. It only responds to emotion, and the dream knows that. So it gives you memories designed to lock you in place, to keep you being the person you think you've always been. And here's the twist. Even false memories can define you. You live as if they're real. You build behaviors around them. You avoid situations because of them. You explain yourself through them. You say, "I've always been this way. I remember what happened last time." It can't do that again. But what if last time never happened? What if your fear is built on a memory your mind fabricated to keep you safe? What if your personality is just the long-term echo of a dream? And if that's true, if your past is built from emotional fiction, then who are you without it? Who are you if you let go of the story? Not in theory, but in practice. What if you stopped trusting memory entirely, not to become blank, but to become present? What if this moment, this is the only reality that exists, and everything else is architecture designed to keep you small? Because that's what false memory does. It convinces you that your limits are inherited, that your shape is permanent, that your wounds are old. But maybe they aren't. That's real is your awareness of that possibility. So now ask yourself, what do you remember that can't be verified? What do you feel that has no source? What stories keep playing in your head without origin? And then ask the hardest question of all. What if I'm not remembering the past? What if I'm remembering the dream? Because dreams give you memory to keep you asleep. But awakening begins when you say, even if I felt it, that doesn't mean it was real. There's someone looking out through your eyes. You don't think about it much. You assume it's you. After all, who else could it be? You see, you hear, you think, and because of that you believe in the one doing the seeing, hearing, thinking. You call it I. You place your trust in it. You build your identity around it. But have you ever stopped to ask, who is the one behind your eyes? Not philosophically. Literally. What exactly is that sense of me that sits behind the face you wear? The quiet watcher, the internal narrator, the one who seems to live just behind the eyes, just above the mouth, like a ghost curled inside the skull. You've felt it, haven't you? That central point of view, that awareness that follows you everywhere, the place where attention seems to originate. But here's the thing. If you turn toward it, can you find it? Right now, try it. Close your eyes. Turn attention inward. Where is the watcher? What shape is it? What color? What sound? Can you touch it? Can you locate it? No. You can sense it, but you can't find it. Because the moment you try to examine it, it disappears. It's like a shadow cast by something not present, a placeholder, a suggestion. And that's where the illusion begins to unravel. You've built your whole life on the idea that there's a solid self inside your body, that the one observing is you. But if that's true, why can't you ever catch it? Why does it vanish every time you look? This is the paradox of the stranger behind your eyes, the unsettling possibility that the I you've trusted your entire life, the one narrating, reacting, deciding, may not be the real witness at all. It may just be a character, a role generated by the system, a voice crafted by the dream to simulate continuity. Let's unpack that. In dreams you also feel like a person. You have a body, a name, a mission, a story. The dream gives you thoughts, reactions, inner dialogue, and it all feels real. Until you wake up. Then you realize none of it was you. It was all part of the dreamscape. So here's the question. How do you know this isn't the same? How do you know the you watching the screen right now, the one nodding along, thinking these thoughts, isn't just another character? What if the real observer isn't the one with the voice? What if it's the one behind the voice? Because here's what most people miss. The voice in your head isn't you. It talks to you. It narrates your day. It criticizes, plans, defends, remembers, it reacts. But if you can hear the voice, that means you're not the voice. You're the one listening. But we get them confused. We hear the internal chatter and assume that's the self. We identify with the stream of thoughts, the emotional surge, the mental image, the me that's constantly talking. But who is it talking to? Who's watching the thoughts happen? Because here's something wild. You don't create your thoughts. They just appear. Try it. Sit in silence for 10 seconds and wait for your next thought. You don't choose it. You don't design it. You don't authorize it. It just arrives, and when it does, you notice it, which means there's something before the thought, something watching. But that watcher isn't thinking. It's not judging. It's not narrating. It's not even doing. It's just aware. And here's where things get strange. That awareness, it doesn't have a personality. It doesn't have an age, a gender, a story. It's not scared, it's not angry, it's not proud, it just sees, just observes. It's like the sky, always present regardless of the weather passing through. And that's where you begin to realize the you've known may not be the sky, it may be the weather. Thoughts, emotions, reactions, they all come and go. But the sky remains. The dream wants you to believe the character is the witness, that the person with the name, the past, the preferences, that's the one who's aware, but it's not. That's the one being observed, that's the avatar, and the true witness, it doesn't speak. It doesn't need to, because it sees everything. Now let's take this even further. What if the voice inside your head is not only not you, but isn't even yours? What if it's an accumulation of borrowed language, social conditioning, ancestral memory, media sound bites, parental echoes? What if that voice was built over time from external data, just like a dream character is built from pieces of memory? That would mean the one you've been calling I is not the source. It's the simulation, a mask layered over silence. Script, layered over awareness, and if you've mistaken the character for the witness, then you've been asleep, even while awake. Because the real you, the awareness, has no narrative. It doesn't need one. It doesn't ask for attention or validation or explanation. It just is. And that's terrifying to the dream, because once you identify as the witness, the character begins to unravel. The dream loses its grip. The illusion of control fades, because characters need control. Witnesses don't. So look again. Behind the eyes. Who's there? Not the one thinking, not the one feeling, not the one reacting, the one watching. The still point, the silence behind the story. The blank canvas beneath the paint. That's who you've been all along. But the dream needs you to forget. It needs you to stay fused with the voice, with the avatar, with the looping identity, because once you see the stranger behind your eyes, you're no longer the character. You're the dreamer. And dreamers don't obey the script, they wake up. So ask yourself, gently but honestly, who is watching these words? Who is feeling this breath? Who is noticing this moment? And can you find them? Not name them, not describe them, not think about them. Find them. If you look closely enough, they disappear. But the awareness doesn't. Because the awareness isn't a thing, it's the space in which all things appear and disappear, including the self. And when you realize that, the illusion breaks. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to begin the return. To the center. To the watcher. To the part of you that was never born, never broken, and never belonged to the dream. Everything around you feels real. The way the light spills across the wall. The softness of your clothes. The familiar vibration of your phone. The sound of your voice in your head. It all seems so seamless, so precise, so certain. And that's the trick. That's the lie. Because if this were a dream, it would have to feel real, or the illusion would fall apart. This is the paradox. The more real something feels, the more suspicious you should be. Not because it's fake in the way a broken simulation glitches, but because it's too smooth, too refined, too perfect. You've been trained to believe that illusions come with cracks, that dreams are disjointed, chaotic, absurd. But the most powerful illusions don't look wrong. They look right. so right that you never think to question them. That's how the dream keeps you in it, not by confusing you, but by convincing you. Let's start with your senses. You trust them. You trust that what you see, hear, touch, taste, and smell is the external world revealing itself. But the truth is, you've never interacted with the real world, only with signals. Electrical patterns in your brain, triggered by waves and frequencies and molecular contact. Your brain isn't showing you reality, it's building a model. A hallucination so consistent, so coherent, that you believe it must be real. But it isn't. It's a map, not the territory, a simulation, and the fact that it doesn't break is exactly why it works. You don't notice the lie because it's beautiful, designed to be immersive. Look at a video game. The most convincing ones aren't the ones with the most action, they're the ones with the smallest details, the dust motes in the sunlight, the slight delay in a character's breath, the imperfections that feel real. Your life is the same. You believe it because it includes things like traffic, taxes, spilled coffee, awkward silences, forgotten birthdays, or the mundane little edges that feel too specific to be scripted. But they are the script. The dream isn't just the highs and lows, it's the normal, the ordinary, the believable. That's how it hides. You don't wake up because something feels fake. You wake up when something feels too real to be questioned. So real you assume it must be yours. So ask yourself, when was the last time you questioned the background? Not the main characters in your life, but the subtle, invisible architecture that surrounds you. The tone of your thoughts, the rhythm of your days, the expectations you didn't write. All of it is part of the lie. But because it's seamless, you accept it. Because it fits, you believe it. Now go deeper. Think about your memories, your childhood, your habits, your preferences. They all form a consistent picture. You say, I've always been this way, this is just me. But what if that consistency is part of the disguise? What if the coherence of your personality is the illusion? The dream doesn't want you confused. It wants you stabilized, predictable, logical. It wants your life to follow a pattern so convincing that you never stop to ask who's writing it. And the most terrifying possibility? It might be you. Not the real you, the dreamer you, the part of you that's asleep, but still generating, still feeding the simulation with expectations, judgments, fears, and scripts. You're not just living inside the dream, you're dreaming it. And the mind left unchecked will keep reinforcing that dream with perfectly reasonable stories. Perfectly rational logic, perfectly structured cause and effect. That's the lie. Not that the world is wild and chaotic, but that it makes too much sense. Because dreams need sense to stay intact. They need continuity, they need identity, they need time to flow like a river. But look closer. Time isn't flowing. It's being constructed. Every second is built in your mind from short-term memory, emotional narrative, and the body's internal clock. There's no external time ticking away. There's only now. And the idea of before and after that you place around it like scaffolding. Time feels real because the dream needs it to, just like space, just like identity, just like every other rule you've never questioned. But what happens if you do question them? What happens when you start noticing that the edges are too clean? That your reality doesn't just exist, it behaves like it's being rendered for you. Have you ever felt that? That sudden shift where everything becomes just a little too present? The light too golden, the silence too loud, the texture of the moment too vivid? That's not coincidence. That's the dream reacting. Because the dream isn't made of nonsense. It's made of precision. And that precision is its strongest defense. Because as long as it feels logical, you won't look behind it. As long as it feels earned, you won't dig beneath it. But awareness isn't fooled by logic. Awareness cuts through narrative. And when you become aware, truly aware, you start to see the structure for what it is. Not broken, flawless. And that's what makes it dangerous, because if the illusion cracked all the time, you'd notice. But when it flows like a movie with no missed beats, you forget. You settle. You trust. And the dream wins. So what can you do? You become suspicious of perfection. You watch the parts of your life that feel too rehearsed, too automatic, too well-framed. You notice the smoothness, not as comfort, but as camouflage. You question the voice in your head that sounds just like you. because it wants to sound like you. That's how it gets you to listen. You notice the way events line up too neatly, the way lessons arrive with just the right timing, the way the world seems to teach you what you needed to learn without you ever knowing you were the student. You say, maybe this isn't real because it's broken. But sometimes it isn't real because it's perfect, because dreams aren't always messy. The best ones are indistinguishable from life. They hold you gently, smoothly, believably, and they don't wake you with terror. They lull you deeper with comfort. So right now, as you sit in the middle of your day, in the middle of this video, in the middle of the life you've always trusted, ask yourself, is this too perfect to be questioned? Does this feel so normal that it must be true? And if the answer is yes, then maybe you've just seen it, the perfect lie. And that means you're closer to waking up than you've ever been. Have you ever woken up from a dream that felt too real? Not just emotionally intense, but visually detailed, viscerally alive? You could feel the texture of the ground beneath your feet. You could smell the air. You could taste something on your tongue that still lingered after waking. And for a moment, maybe longer, you weren't sure which world was real. That wasn't just a dream. That was something else. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't less real than this. Maybe it was more. This is the paradox of the realer dream. The kind that doesn't fade when you wake. The kind that seems to contain more truth than your ordinary day-to-day life. More emotion, more clarity, more presence. And the moment you feel that, everything you thought you knew about real starts to bend. We were taught to believe that waking life is the real one and dreams are just simulations, random firings of the brain, a sandbox for thoughts, nothing of value. But if that's true, why do some dreams feel more true than anything that's ever happened to you? Why do they leave marks? Why do they change you? Why do they remember you? You see, not all dreams are the same. Some come from the surface. They're built from noise, things you saw, worries you had, stress loops. But then there are other dreams, dreams that arrive with weight, with message, with presence. These dreams don't wander. They speak. And they don't ask permission. They show you something you didn't know you needed to see. They feel bigger than you, as if you're being shown, not imagining, as if something is being remembered, not invented. And here's the part we don't talk about enough. Sometimes those dreams feel more real than your life. And that should make you wonder, what is reality exactly? Because if the test for reality is vividness, the dream wins. If it's emotional truth, the dream wins. If it's the clarity of moment-to-moment knowing, the dream wins. So maybe we need to rethink the whole thing. Maybe real isn't defined by whether your eyes are open or closed. Maybe real is defined by depth, by awareness, by presence. And in that case, many dreams are more real than most waking moments. Because let's be honest, how present are you right now? How often are you fully here? Most of the time you're in fragments. Part of you is reliving yesterday. Part of you is rehearsing tomorrow. Part of you is numbed out entirely scrolling through digital noise. But in certain dreams, you're fully there. You're not distracted, you're not split. You're awake inside the illusion, and that's the secret. Waking life only feels real because you're asleep within it. And certain dreams only feel fake because you're awake within them. But once you reverse that, everything changes. Because now, the dream becomes a message, a signal, a gateway, and reality becomes the illusion. Because what defines reality isn't its rules, it's your awareness of it. And some dreams bring you more awake than this moment ever has. Let's go deeper. There's a state of consciousness called lucid dreaming. You've heard of it. It's when you realize you're dreaming while still inside the dream. Suddenly everything sharpens, colors get brighter, sounds become layered. You can feel the wind on your skin. The ground responds to your footsteps. And the strange thing? It all feels more real than real. Why? Because your awareness turned on. Not your eyes, not your body, your awareness. And the moment that happens, the dream wakes up with you. But here's the twist. What if waking life is just another layer of the dream? And right now, you're not lucid. You're moving through a script, reacting, obeying, noticing but not questioning, thinking but not seeing. So what would happen if you became lucid here? Right now? What would happen if you turned on that same awareness, the kind you only associate with deep dreams, and brought it to this moment? You'd feel the same shift, the sharpness, the stillness, the recognition that this isn't as solid as you thought, that the people, places, roles, and routines you've anchored yourself to are part of the dream too, and when that hits you, it won't feel fake. It'll feel realer than anything else, because it's not about the environment. It's about the observer. The moment you become aware of the dream becomes real. Not because it's literal, but because it's alive, because you're meeting it consciously. And most of life, you don't. You sleepwalk, you autopilot, you perform being awake without actually being aware. But when a dream shakes you so deeply that you question everything, it's not a nightmare, it's an invitation, a doorway to a deeper layer of you, because some part of you knows. Some part of you remembers that this isn't the first dream, or the deepest, and that the closer you get to the truth, the more vivid the illusion becomes, because that's how it protects itself. It disguises the truth as fantasy. It paints the waking world in dull tones so you'll stop looking, and then it gives you a dream with so much fire, so much clarity, so much truth, you can't ignore it, even if you wanted to. That's the realer dream, the one that calls you back. Not to sleep, but to presence. To awaken not from the dream, but within it. So if you've ever had a dream that haunted you, if you've ever felt like the deepest part of you was revealed in sleep, not in life, if you've ever woken up with tears in your eyes, or a message in your chest, or a clarity you couldn't explain, that wasn't a glitch. That wasn't your mind playing games. That was you, seeing the world as it really is. Just for a moment, the veil lifted. And now, you're being asked to lift it again, but this time, here. Because if a dream can feel more real than life, then life might be just another dream. And you're the dreamer, not the character, not the story, not the sleeper, the dreamer. So wake up, not by opening your eyes, but by turning on the light inside them. You wake up, stretch, brush your teeth. You scroll, you check, you plan. You move through your day thinking it's yours, your thoughts, your choices, your voice. But what if it's not? What if everything you're doing right now is part of a script? And what if that script wasn't written by you? You see, most people go through life convinced they're in control, that they're deciding, choosing, that their reactions, desires, and behaviors come from someplace deep inside, a core of selfhood that knows what it wants. But pause for a moment, zoom out. Where did that self come from? Really think. Did you design your preferences? Did you invent your beliefs? Did you sculpt your personality like a sculpture, deliberate, conscious, precise? Or did it just happen? Did it unfold the way a character does on stage? Responding to cues, improvising within boundaries, reciting lines you didn't know you were handed. You're not acting randomly. You're following something. And if you trace the thread back far enough, you might find that everything you call you was written for you. By parents, by culture, by repetition, by trauma, by accident, by everything you didn't choose, but had to respond to. And the more you look, the more unnerving it becomes. Because the script isn't just about what you do. It's about how you think. You've been trained, scripted, coded to value some things, reject others, to speak with a certain tone, to interpret events in a specific way, to categorize yourself as this kind of person and not that one. You're thinking for yourself. But how much of your inner monologue is borrowed? How many of your decisions are reactions? How many of your emotions are habits you didn't know you had? It's not that you're robotic, it's that you're rehearsed. And every day you step into the role without even realizing it. The student, the parent, the overachiever, the rebel, the caretaker, the loner, the funny one, the smart one, the broken one, the victim, the strong one, the misunderstood. Whatever mask you wear, it fits. But who gave it to you? Who wrote the character? Who handed you the script? You didn't audition for this role, you were born into it. Shaped by expectations, molded by early feedback, rewarded when you played your part well. punished when you didn't. So you adapted, you learned your lines, you performed, and the performance became who you thought you were. But deep down, you feel it, don't you? That flicker of mismatch. That moment of silence in your mind when something says this isn't really me. But you can't stop the performance, because the audience is watching, because the lines are memorized, because the spotlight is warm and the stage feels safe, even if it's not real. And here's the wild part. Even your rebellion is scripted. Even your resistance, your defiance, your escape, those too are written in. You're not breaking the pattern. You're following the alternate route the pattern prepared. Because the dream is clever. It knows you'll want to break free. So it gives you a version of freedom that still fits the script. But awakening, true awakening, that begins when you drop the role entirely. When you stop asking how to win the performance and start asking why you're in the play. When you don't just question the lines, you question the author. Because until then, you're not writing, you're reacting. And your life isn't a story you're creating. It's a pre-written scene you're acting out with emotion and conviction. But conviction doesn't make it yours, it just makes it feel real. The dream wants you to love your character, to identify so deeply with the role that you forget it's a role. You'll say things like, "That's just who I am. I could never do that. I've always been this way." But none of that is truth. It's just the script doing its job. Keeping you in character, keeping you small, keeping you believable. Because the dream doesn't need you to be happy. It just needs you to continue, to stay in motion, to keep saying your lines, to keep thinking you're choosing them. But real freedom? That comes the moment you forget the lines, the moment you go silent mid-scene and ask, "Wait, who gave me these words?" That's the crack. That's the glitch. That's where the dream starts to collapse. Because without the script, who are you? Without the story, what remains? It's terrifying at first. Because the role was safe, the lines gave you identity, the costume gave you confidence, the plot gave you purpose. Without it, there's only space, stillness, unknown. But that's where the real self lives. Not the self you were told to be, not the self you rehearsed, the self before the script, the one that doesn't perform. The one that watches the performance without getting caught in it. So now ask yourself, gently, honestly, what parts of your personality feel automatic? What emotional reactions are too fast to be conscious? What beliefs do you carry without ever asking who handed them to you? And most importantly, if you paused the performance right now, what silence would rise in its place? Would it be terrifying, or would it feel like freedom? Because here's the truth. You are not the character, you are not the role, you are not the words. You're the blank page beneath it all, the one who could write, the one who is writing if only you'd stop reading from someone else's script. So let this be the moment you step off stage. Let the spotlight dim, let the costume fall, let the silence speak louder than the dialogue, because in that silence, you might finally meet the one you were before the story began. You were there, now you're here, but what happened in between? You don't know. You barely noticed. You blinked. You turned your head. And time moved forward like it always does. But somewhere in that motion, somewhere between then and now, a moment vanished. Maybe it was small, forgettable. Or maybe it was massive, and you only realized later. Something's gone. Not erased, not deleted, just never there. This is the mystery of the missing moment. The space in your timeline that feels like it should have happened, but didn't. And once you begin to notice these gaps, they start appearing everywhere. Not just in hours, but in seconds. Micro slips in the stream of time. You're brushing your teeth, and then you're putting on your shoes. You're walking through a doorway, and then you're in the kitchen with no memory of arriving. You're scrolling your phone, and suddenly it's 45 minutes later. And each time the story picks up. Without resistance. Your mind doesn't panic. It fills in the blank, it assumes continuity, it says, "I was just distracted," or "I must have zoned out." But here's the question. What if you didn't zone out? What if something skipped? What if that moment never actually existed? Not as an accident, not as a glitch, but as part of the dream's design. Because dreams don't need continuity, they just need believability. And when you're inside a dream, you rarely question the jumps. You're in one place, then another. You're talking to someone, then you're flying, or falling, or standing in a memory, and it all makes sense while you're in it. Only later do you realize none of that connected. But here's the twist. You're doing that now, too, in waking life. Every single day. Moments are vanishing, time is skipping. You're jumping scenes like cuts in a film, and your brain smooths it over so seamlessly you never notice. Because the dream needs you to believe in a clean timeline. So it hides the cuts behind routine, behind habit, behind normal. But normal is the perfect hiding place for the unreal. Let's take an example. Have you ever driven somewhere and arrived with no memory of the road? Your hands were on the wheel, your eyes were open, your foot was on the gas, but where was your mind? It wasn't asleep, but it wasn't here either. You were in a missing moment, a sequence your brain deemed unnecessary to render in full, so it faded to black, just like a dream skipping forward. Just like a scene change in a play, just like a simulation loading only what's in front of you. So here's the uncomfortable possibility. What if your life isn't happening continuously? What if it's happening in fragments, rendered only when observed, loaded only when required? What if time isn't flowing like a river, but flickering like a slideshow? And what you call you is just the awareness skipping from one slide to the next, assuming it's a smooth ride. That would mean memory isn't just faulty, it's incomplete by design. Because you're not living in time, you're living in a narrative of time, one that's built in post-production. And the missing moments, they were never part of the script. You think they're errors. But they're actually evidence. Evidence that the dream isn't continuous. It's stitched together, a patchwork of rendered scenes. And the stitching is invisible until you look for it. So start looking. Watch how your mind covers the gaps. Watch how you explain the missing moment without realizing it's missing. I guess I was just tired. I must have been thinking about something else. I wasn't really paying attention. But maybe that moment simply didn't exist, not because you weren't present, but because the moment wasn't real. And now, go deeper. What if the most important moments of your life are missing? What if you've already had revelations, breakdowns, breakthroughs, awakenings, only to have the dream overwrite them? What if you've already seen behind the curtain? What if you've already tried to wake up, and then the dream skipped the moment? It smoothed it over, it filled in the blank, it dropped you back into the performance with just enough continuity to keep the story alive. This is what dreams do when you get too close to waking. They cut the scene, they load a new one, they reset. And all you're left with is the faint feeling that something just happened, but you can't say what. You just know the moment is gone, like a page missing from a book, and the story continues as if the page was never there. Because that's what the dream does, it protects its own continuity, even if it means erasing yours. So now, ask yourself, how many of your days are made of missing moments? How much of your past is built from assumptions and filler? How much of your present is simply what loads when you look? And what's hiding in the moments you don't remember? Because that's where the truth lives. In the seconds you skip. In the scenes you don't see. In the moments that never happened but should have. And if you let yourself feel that loss, not logically but in your bones, you'll sense it. Something's missing, and it always has been, not by accident, but because the dream needs holes, it needs gaps, it needs unrendered time, because awareness, real awareness, requires silence to be seen, and the dream fears that silence. So it gives you distraction, it gives you autopilot, it gives you movement, and then when you get too close, it cuts the scene, and the moment is gone. So what do? You stop filling in the blanks. You stop pretending the cut was smooth, you notice the seams, you watch for the vanish, and when it happens, don't explain it away, just feel it, that gap in the reel, that hole in the film, that breach in time, and let that breach widen. because through it, you might just remember what the dream tried to make you forget. You might just step into the moment that was never meant to exist. You might just wake up between the scenes. At first, it's just quiet. You step inside. The door closes behind you. No voices, no screens, no footsteps. No humming appliances or distant traffic. It's a rare kind of stillness. One you don't notice until everything else has stopped. It's not peace yet, just absence. You think, silence. But wait long enough and you'll realize that wasn't silence at all. That was just the absence of external sound. Because now, something else is starting to rise. You begin to hear things, not from outside, but from in here. The inner noise, the unrelenting thoughts, the unfinished sentences. The subtle panic in your chest you didn't notice all day, the strange awareness of your breath, your posture, your heartbeat. In the absence of outer volume, something else becomes deafening. You meet yourself. And that's when you realize silence isn't the absence of sound. Silence is the presence of everything you've been avoiding. We live in a world of noise, constant input. From morning to night there's a soundtrack. Conversation, music, alerts, feeds, video, commentary. Even when things are technically quiet, we fill the space with stimulation. Podcasts in the car, YouTube while eating, scrolling before bed. Because silence is dangerous. It's unpredictable. You don't know what you'll find in it. Or maybe you do, and that's why you avoid it. Noise protects you from the truth. It numbs, it distracts. It gives shape to emptiness. But silence doesn't shape anything. It reveals. It uncovers what the noise has been masking, and for some people that's unbearable. Because silence doesn't flatter your ego, it doesn't confirm your opinions, it doesn't echo your beliefs, it just is, neutral, open, exposing. And when you enter that kind of stillness, when you truly sit inside the silent room, you start hearing things you didn't know were still echoing inside you. Grief you buried years ago. Anger that never found a voice. Questions you stopped asking because the answers scared you. It all comes back in the silence, because silence is honest. It doesn't censor. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It just shows you what's there. And if you stay long enough, the noise inside begins to fade too. Not because it's gone, but because you've heard it. You've let it speak. When the emotions are witnessed, they soften. And that's when the true silence begins. Not empty, not blank, but clear, transparent, alive. And in that moment, you'll realize something else. Noise wasn't just distracting you from pain. It was distracting you from presence, from the part of you that doesn't need to talk or scroll or think. The part that just is. Always watching, always still, but always drowned out by performance, by narrative, by mental chatter that pretends to be you. But when the silence deepens and you move past the internal commentary, you come into contact with something else, a strange, vibrant awareness, not a thought, not a feeling, but a space, a field of being that's not trying to do anything. And suddenly you understand, you've never really been alone with yourself, because you've never stayed long enough in silence to meet what lives underneath the noise. You thought the voice in your head was you, but silence shows you that the voice is just a recording, a program, a pattern, and behind that voice is the listener, the witness, the part of you that's never said a word but has always been watching. And now, without noise to cover it, you feel its presence. It's not dramatic, it doesn't make a big entrance. It's quiet, still, but unshakable. And once you meet it, you realize how loud your life has been, how much of your identity has been built on noise, how often you've used sound to escape stillness. Because stillness is terrifying, until it isn't. Until you realize that stillness isn't emptiness. It's truth. The room goes silent. And finally, so do you. And in that moment, you don't disappear. You don't dissolve. You arrive. For the first time in maybe years, you arrive in yourself. Without commentary, without projection, without explanation, just this. Just presence. And now the silent room isn't a prison. It's a mirror, and what it reflects is real. Not the role you play, not the opinions you've gathered, not the personality you've defended, just awareness. Simple, unmoving, and free. This is why silence is feared, because it strips away identity. It doesn't respect your story. It doesn't need to. Silence isn't interested in who you think you are. It's interested in what remains when the thinking stops, and what remains is more you than any thought could ever be. So now ask yourself, when was the last time you truly sat in silence? Not waiting, not meditating as a technique, not performing calm, just listening, just being. And what came up? Did you judge it? Did you try to explain it? Or did you just let it be? Because everything you're afraid to face is hiding in that silence. And everything you're seeking also hiding in that silence. Stillness is the paradox. It holds the pain and the healing. It reveals the wound and the medicine. It shows you who you're not so you can finally meet who you are. So if you're brave enough, go to the silent room, close the door, turn off the noise, let the echoes rise. Let the thoughts pour out. Let the emotions swirl. Don't resist it. Just notice. And then wait. On the other side of that wave is stillness. Not imposed, not performed, but discovered, like a forgotten friend, like a buried treasure, like a home you didn't know you'd left. Because silence isn't the absence of life. It's where life reveals itself, not in sound, but in presence, not in motion, but in awareness. And when all else fades, it's silence that remains, waiting, patiently, for you to return. You've passed by this spot 1,000 times. It's familiar, unchanging, solid. You know where the doors are, where the corners meet, where the wall ends, where the floor turns. Until today. Today, there's a hallway, a space you've never seen before, a corridor long and quiet, stretching out like it's always been there, waiting. But here's the thing, you know it wasn't there yesterday. You're not guessing, you're sure. You've lived in this building, worked in this office, walked past this place every single day, and yet, here it is. You stare, and something strange settles in your stomach. Not fear, but friction. A quiet dissonance between memory and reality, like the world just glitched or updated. You ask yourself, did this just appear? Or did I just notice? And maybe the scarier question is, what else have I missed? Because if the hallway could exist without your awareness, what does that say about the rest of your life? What's out there, right now, that you simply haven't seen yet? Not because it's hidden, but because your mind hasn't loaded it in. You see, we like to believe perception is passive, that we open our eyes and the world appears. But it's not like that. Your brain doesn't capture reality, it constructs it. And it does so selectively, efficiently, using the least energy possible to give you the illusion of completeness. It filters, it edits, it renders on demand. Just like a video game only loads the parts of the map you're walking through, your mind only draws in the parts of reality you're focused on, and everything else. It's just placeholders, blank textures, unopened files, unrendered potential, until one day something shifts. You look again, and the hallway is there, clear, solid, undeniable, and you realize maybe it's always been there, or maybe it's only now becoming real because you're finally in the state to see it. The mind isn't a camera, It's a projector, and what it projects onto the world is what you perceive. Which means, that hallway, it wasn't missing. You were. Your awareness was turned away. Your attention was elsewhere. Your expectations formed blinders. So the space didn't exist in your reality. Until now. This happens in life all the time. A person you've known for years suddenly says something and you hear them differently. A truth you've heard 100 times suddenly hits you in a new way. A possibility you never imagined becomes obvious. And every time, it feels like the hallway just appeared. But it didn't. Your mind just finally opened the door. Because awareness doesn't move through reality, awareness unfolds reality. And the more aware you are, the more reality expands. Which means, most of your world is still invisible. Not because it's hiding from you, but because you're hiding from it. Conditioning has narrowed your lens. Routine has smoothed your perception. Belief has shaped your expectations. And as a result, you live in a limited map of a much larger territory. But every now and then, something breaks. A disruption, a moment of stillness, a dream, a crisis, a flicker of intuition, and suddenly you see something that shouldn't be there. A hallway, a door, a path that defies logic, and you don't know whether it just appeared or you just woke up enough to notice it. This is how expansion begins, not with new places, but with new sight. A new frequency of perception that unlocks pieces of your world you didn't know were possible. And here's the wild part. The hallway doesn't just exist out there. It exists in you, because your inner architecture works the same way. You've mapped out your mind. I'm like this. I don't go there. That part of me is locked. That room doesn't exist. But what if it does? What if your inner landscape is full of doors you've never tried to open? What if, buried beneath habit and fear and repetition, there's a whole wing of you undiscovered? What if you've been walking the same hallway for years, not because that's all there is, but because that's all you expected, and now something shifts? You stop. You turn your head. And there it is, a hallway in your own consciousness, a path you never thought to take. A question you never dared to ask, a part of you that's been quietly waiting, so you step toward it, cautious, curious. And the walls don't dissolve, they expand. Your mind doesn't crack, it awakens. Because this is what growth really is, not becoming something new, but noticing what was already there, the capacity you forgot, the self you silenced, the dimensions you were told not to believe in. They've been there all along, and now that you've seen them, they won't disappear. Because awareness doesn't unsee. Once the hallway appears, it changes the map. Even if you never walk down it, even if you close the door again, even if you pretend it was just your imagination, you'll remember. You'll remember there was more space, more choice, more you. And that memory will haunt you in the best way. It'll whisper through the walls of your routine. It'll echo in the silence of your certainty. It'll remind you that perception is never complete, and that you're always just one shift away from a new layer of truth. So now, ask yourself, where are the hallways I haven't seen? What part of reality have I filtered out because it didn't fit the story? What part of me have I denied because it didn't match the mask? Look again. Right now, look at your world with fresh eyes. Look at your mind with beginner's curiosity. Look at your soul as if you've never met it before. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see it. That strange, impossible hallway, stretching out like it's been there the whole time, because it has. And now that you've noticed, the question isn't, was it always there? The question is, where does it lead? Close your eyes. Listen to the voice in your head. It's there, isn't it? Commenting, planning, judging, remembering, rehearsing. It never quite stops. It narrates your day, your mood, your actions. It fills the quiet. It interprets what others say. It answers questions you never asked, and most of the time it sounds like you. Same tone, same vocabulary, same rhythm you'd use if you were actually speaking out loud. It feels familiar, it feels like home, it feels like you thinking. But here's the paradox. If you're the one thinking, who's the one hearing the thoughts? Because if you really listen, really watch that voice inside, you'll notice something strange. You're not the one creating the thoughts, you're just the one noticing them. The voice runs without your permission. It speaks before you intend. It reacts before you understand. It repeats things you never meant to believe, and it never asks if it's welcome, it just talks. So ask yourself, if you don't control what it says, if you don't decide when it starts, if you can't predict where it goes, then who or what is actually speaking? Because that voice isn't silence, it isn't presence, it isn't awareness. It's something else, something layered over the real you. And once you realize that, everything changes. Because now you're not just thinking. You're hearing a voice that pretends to be you. It sounds like you, but it's not you. It's a performance, a recording, a loop. And it started long before you had the power to question it. The voice in your head was built from childhood echoes, your parents' tone, your teacher's rules, your culture's assumptions, your society's fears. All of it downloaded into your mind before you had a choice. And over time, you internalized it. You absorbed it. You repeated it. Until the voice became automatic, familiar, convincing. But it never stopped being a program. And like any program, it runs in the background until you decide to interrupt it. So right now, take a breath and ask yourself, what is the voice saying? What tone does it use? Is it kind, critical, anxious, flat? Does it motivate you or exhaust you? Does it speak in your language or someone else's? And most importantly, when did you start believing it was you? Because that belief, that your inner voice is your true identity, is the trap. It keeps you fused to the monologue. It keeps you reacting to thoughts as if they're truth. It keeps you believing that every word inside your head deserves your attention. But it doesn't, because most of it's noise, mental static, leftover scripts from moments you never processed, wounds you never healed, beliefs you never chose. And it runs on autopilot until you wake up inside the stream, until you stop being the speaker and start becoming the listener. This is the moment consciousness shifts. When you realize you are not the voice, you are the awareness behind the voice, the silent watcher, the space that hears the sound, not the sound itself. And in that space, the whole world opens, because now, when a thought arises, you don't chase it. You observe it. You ask, is that even true? You ask, do I actually believe this, or did someone teach it to me? You ask, why is this voice always afraid? Why is it always proving something? Why does it sound like someone who doesn't trust me? And suddenly, what used to feel like you now feels like an influence, a ghost, an echo of everything you've been exposed to. And the deeper you listen, the more clearly you can distinguish between the constructed voice and the true presence underneath. Because there is another voice inside you. Not a voice of words, but of knowing, quiet, steady, unimpressed by drama. It doesn't panic. It doesn't shout. It doesn't run in circles. It just knows. It speaks in clarity, in stillness, in direction, in intuition. And when you make space for that deeper signal, you'll feel the difference instantly. The surface voice feels frantic, repetitive, insecure. The deeper voice feels calm, grounded, trustworthy. The surface voice wants control. The deeper voice already trusts. The surface voice is loud. The deeper voice doesn't need to speak. And here's the trick. That deeper voice was always there. It's not new. It's not something you have to create. It's what remains when the noise dies down. It's what emerges when you stop mistaking the mental chatter for truth. It's what rises when you stop asking what to think and start listening for what knows. But the surface voice will fight you. It doesn't want to be seen as an illusion. It wants to stay relevant. It wants to keep talking, keep spinning, keep performing. Because that's what it does. That's what it is, the performance. But once you witness it, really witness it, it loses its grip. You don't have to argue with it. You don't have to fix it. You just have to see it. And once you do, something shifts. You stop being the one thinking, and you start being the one watching the thoughts. And that single shift is the beginning of freedom. Not because the thoughts go away, but because they lose their power over you. They become passing clouds, not storms. They become background music, not commands. And you become something deeper. Not the voice, but the silence it echoes in. Not the thought, but the awareness that sees the thought. Not even you, not the illusion, but the witness. So now take one more moment, close your eyes again, and listen. What is the voice in your head saying right now? And can you hear it without believing it? Can you feel the space between you and the thought? Because in that space is who you really are. You feel it again, that sense of conclusion, like you've finally arrived somewhere real, somewhere solid. You've pieced together the meaning, you've closed the arc, you've understood the lesson. You tell yourself, this is it, this is the end. You breathe, you rest, you let go. For a moment there's peace. For a moment there's stillness. And then, something stirs. The ground shifts. The peace doesn't last. Because something new arises. A question, a doubt, a new truth that renders the old one incomplete. And you realize you're not at the end. You're in another loop. It's subtle, cruel almost. Every time you believe you've reached the final answer, it reveals itself as just another frame inside a bigger picture, another rung on an endless spiral. This is the repeating ending. And if you're honest, you've felt it before. You thought the heartbreak would be the last one. It wasn't. You thought the breakthrough was the pinnacle. It wasn't. You thought the awakening was permanent. It wasn't. Each ending cracked open something deeper. Each resolution seeded a new riddle. Each closure bled into another question. Why? Because the dream never ends. It just reshapes. And your mind, clever as it is, wants closure. It craves it. It begs for a full stop, a conclusion, a point where you can say, now I know. But truth doesn't work like that. Awareness doesn't have edges. Consciousness doesn't stop expanding. And the moment you think you've reached the finish line, you find another hallway, another staircase, another paradox that dissolves everything you just believed. You don't reach the end. You reach the edge of your current understanding. And that edge becomes the beginning of something else. And that's the trap. Because every time the loop resets, you think you're seeing something new. But you're not. You're just zooming out. You're seeing that what you called truth was just a layer, a mask, a dream within a dream. You go through life believing in final chapters, believing that closure exists, that one day the mind will settle, the wounds will heal, the questions will stop. But they don't. They transform. The pain of childhood becomes the pattern of adulthood. The questions of identity become the questions of soul. The search for meaning becomes the surrender to mystery. And every time you think, this is it, life whispers, not quite. So what do you do with that? Do you despair? Do you give up the search? Do you numb yourself with distractions, convince yourself that meaning doesn't matter? Or do you wake up to the game? Do you realize that the loop isn't a failure, that maybe it's the point? Because the loop doesn't mean you're lost. The loop means you're still evolving. You're still expanding. You're still peering through layer after layer of illusion, searching for something that can't be reduced to a single idea. And maybe that's not a curse, maybe that's grace. Because if the story had an ending, so would your awareness. And maybe the most alive thing about you is that you never finish waking up. Each aha is just a doorway. Each insight is just a raft to the next shore, and every time you arrive you discover you've only just begun. The spiritual path, the psychological journey, the healing process, the inner inquiry, it all promises progress, completion, ascension. But look closely. None of them ever deliver an ending, because truth isn't a final destination, it's a movement, an unfolding, a dance that never completes its last step. And every time you think, now I've got it, you blink, and the next layer starts to open, and it always will. So here's the deeper realization. You are not here to reach the end. You are here to become aware of the pattern, to watch how the mind insists on closure, to observe how ego craves certainty, to see how identity hardens around each final answer, and then to let it all go, again and again and again. Because real awareness doesn't hold on. It flows, it allows, it watches the ending become the beginning, and it smiles, because it knows the truth. There was never a finish line, only an invitation to go deeper, to see clearer, to wake up again and again. You don't graduate from the dream. You notice the looping. You recognize that every time you think you've arrived, you've just reached another threshold, another dream layer revealing itself. And the gift, the freedom, it's in not needing it to end, not needing to be done, not needing the perfect understanding, but resting inside the awareness that watches all understandings come and go, like waves, like weather, like thoughts. And when you stop clinging to resolution, you become spacious, you become soft, you become unshakable, because you no longer depend on answers to feel whole. You are the space those answers arise in. So ask yourself now, how many times have I thought I'd reached the end, only to loop again? How many final awakenings have I had? How many times has life shown me that the truth is never fixed? And more importantly, can I let go of the craving for the last page? Can I be here in the middle of the story, knowing the story has no end? Can I walk forward without expecting to arrive? Can I let each insight dissolve into the next? Because when you do, you stop walking in circles, you start spiraling. Higher, deeper, wider, the same lessons revisited with new eyes, the same emotions met with more compassion, the same mysteries held with less fear. And the loop becomes a rhythm, not a trap, but a heartbeat, pulsing you into more truth, more surrender, more presence. This is the sacred loop. The repeating ending that is always a beginning. And once you see it, you stop rushing toward the final line. You stop demanding closure. You stop seeking the illusion of being finished. And you start listening to the rhythm, the return, the infinite spiral of self meeting self. And in that rhythm, you're not stuck, you're not lost, you're not broken. You're becoming, again and again and again. You like to think you're in control, that every moment you stand at a crossroads, that your choices shape your future, that your intentions mold reality, that your preferences and plans and personal willpower are steering the wheel of your life. But let's slow it down. Let's look more closely. Have you ever made a decision, big or small, and afterward realized you don't know why you chose it? You rationalize it later. You come up with reasons, but those reasons came after, not before, because the decision was already happening before you were aware of deciding. You reached for the snack before you thought, I want it. You said the words before you knew what you were about to say. You turned left instead of right and later justified it, but in the moment it just happened, and neuroscience backs this up. Studies show your brain decides several milliseconds before you become aware of making a choice. The action is initiated before you think you've acted. In other words, the decision is already made. You just show up afterward and call it your choice. You walk into a room where the script is already written, and you speak the lines thinking you wrote them. So the question becomes, are you the author or just the actor? Are you choosing or just witnessing the appearance of choice? This isn't about fate versus free will. This is about a deeper illusion. The illusion that you, as the conscious mind, are in control. But what if you're not? What if the real decisions are happening beneath consciousness, in layers of mind you never see? What if the subconscious, shaped by your conditioning, your past, your biology, your trauma, has already picked the path and your awareness is just catching up? And even deeper than that, what if the dream itself is choosing? What if you, the character, are playing out a destiny scripted by something far larger, something you can't control because it isn't separate from you? What if your life is unfolding with the precision of a story and every choice you think you're making is just the next scene? Here's what's terrifying and liberating all at once. You've never made a choice. Not really. Not in the way you imagined. You've only become aware of the movement after it's begun. It's like walking through a hallway and only realizing which door you took after it closes behind you. And that awareness, that delay, is everything. Because it shows you that consciousness is not the creator of choice, it's the witness of choice. Which means the you that thinks it's choosing is just watching, justifying, narrating a script that's already playing. And if that's true, then who or what is really choosing? Is it your brain, your biology, your karmic momentum, the unconscious archetypes living inside you? Is it the collective dream? Or is it something more mysterious, something timeless, something outside the illusion of choice and consequence altogether? And if you follow that thread far enough, you begin to see the shape of something that both frees you and dissolves you. Because if the decision is already made, then the pressure lifts, the panic disappears, the regret softens. You no longer have to wrestle with every fork in the road. You no longer have to torment yourself with what if. Because what is, simply is, not because you failed to choose better, but because the choice was never in your hands. And yet, here's the paradox. Knowing this doesn't make you passive. It doesn't make you a puppet. In fact, it makes you present. Because the illusion of control was never making you free. It was making you anxious. And once you release that illusion, something else arises: clarity and stillness, a willingness to respond instead of react, a softness toward life as it unfolds. Because you're no longer trapped in the fiction that you're steering every outcome. You're no longer blaming yourself for the path that was never really yours to shape. You're just here, witnessing, participating, and allowing the current to move through you. This is what ancient traditions have pointed to for centuries. The Tao says, do nothing, yet nothing is left undone. Buddhism speaks of non-doership, the idea that there is action but no actor. Advaita Vedanta says you are not the body, you are not the mind. You are the awareness in which all action appears. Even modern neuroscience whispers the same truth, that the self is a narration, not a cause. And the decision, it happened before you arrived. You've just forgotten that it was never yours to begin with. So can you sit with that? Can you breathe with the idea that your life is a river you never started? That you are a wave in a vast ocean that's already in motion? Can you surrender the illusion of authorship, and in doing so, find the freedom of being written? Because when you do, something incredible happens. You stop fighting the moment. You stop second-guessing the path, and you start flowing with a presence so intelligent, so precise, so vast, that it humbles everything you thought you controlled. You no longer need to make the right choice. You trust that the choice that arises, however strange, however difficult, is the one meant to arise. Not because it's easy, but because it's real. Because it came from a place deeper than your logic, deeper than your will, deeper than the you who thinks it's in charge. And maybe that's where true power lives, not in choosing, but in witnessing the choice as it unfolds, with awareness, with openness, with trust, because the dream is still dreaming, and you are the dreamer and the dreamed. You are the player and the play. You are the story and the silence beneath it. And every forgotten decision was exactly what was always going to happen, not by mistake, but by design, by something wiser than your fear, something more ancient than your identity, something that remembers the path even when you forget. You say, "This is me." You point to a name, a birthday, a body, a backstory. You recall your childhood, your opinions, your preferences. You piece it together like a puzzle and call it you. But look closer. What exactly are you pointing to? Are you your thoughts? They come and go. Are you your memories? They fade, distort, vanish without warning. Are you your emotions? They shift from one moment to the next, completely transforming your sense of reality. So again, who are you? You feel like a stable self, a center of gravity, an I that's been here all along. But what if that feeling is just momentum, just a memory so often repeated it started to believe itself? Because the truth is, the self is not a solid thing, it's a story. A thread woven from recollection, reaction, repetition, a ghost made of narrative, and the more you examine it, the more it slips through your fingers. Try it now. Try to find the exact moment where you begin. Try to find the line between you and the world. Try to find the boundary between observer and observed. It's not there. The more closely you look, the more the self begins to dissolve. And at first that feels terrifying. If you're not your story, if you're not your thoughts, if you're not even your identity, then what's left? What remains when the narrator goes silent? What lives beneath the name? That question haunts the seeker. And yet, it also frees them, because once the self begins to vanish, something deeper is revealed. A space, an awareness, not shaped by memory, not colored by belief. It's not you in the personal sense. It's not a personality at all. It's presence. Still, constant, unnamed. It doesn't say, "I am this" or "I am that." It simply says, "I am." And that "I am" is not made of words. It's not made of history. It's not made of form. It's made of pure seeing, pure being. It's what you've been all along, before the story was learned, before the character was built, before the self was constructed like a mask and passed around like a passport. You were never the mask. You were the face behind it, and even that wasn't fixed, because there is no final face. No core identity you can grasp and hold forever, just layers of awareness, and underneath each layer, more stillness, more space, more freedom. That's why awakening isn't about becoming something, it's about losing something. Losing the belief that you were ever a separate self, losing the narrative that kept you small, losing the illusion of a fixed identity. And in that loss, you gain the one thing that can't be taken away. Not an idea, not a label, not a role, but being. Not as a someone, but as this moment, this breath, this unmoving center of watching, the disappearing self. But what disappears is never you. It's just the illusion of you, the ghost you mistook for substance, the voice you thought was the whole room. When it fades, you remain, silent, still, real, not as a thing, but as this very presence, before the story, before the thought, before the I, just being, and that is who you are. You stand before the mirror. At first you expect the usual, the familiar contours of your face, the expression that reflects your mood, the features that you have known since you were a child. But today something is different. The mirror doesn't show a constant image, and for a moment you feel an unfamiliar emptiness behind the reflection. You search for the you that you've always taken for granted. You try to pinpoint exactly where your identity lies. Is it in the shape of your eyes, the curve of your smile, or the outline of your nose? But as you look deeper, you realize that the mirror is not simply returning a picture of your physical form. It is challenging your very assumption that there is a fixed you behind it. For years, we've clung to the notion that a mirror is a window into our own soul, a visual confirmation of our individuality. It reassures us that we exist as distinct entities, complete with unchanging features, and a story etched into every line and wrinkle. Yet today, the mirror presents a puzzle. Your reflection seems to mock the idea of permanence. It shifts and flickers in subtle ways that you hadn't noticed before, even if the change is a slight, a momentary blur, a hesitation in the image. It makes you wonder, what if everything you assumed about your identity is just a transient projection? Consider this. When you look into the mirror, you are not meeting some independent you that has always been there. Instead, you are witnessing an image constructed in real time by your brain. A fleeting rendering that mirrors not just your physical appearance, but also your internal state. And that image is subject to change, much like your thoughts and emotions. The reflection is an ever-changing narrative, rather than a static portrait. It is a series of moments stitched together, a collage of memories, sensations, and perceptions that you believe forms your identity. In that case, who is really behind the mirror? The answer might not be the person you think you are. It might be nothing more than a collection of reactions and conditioned responses, a performance crafted by years of habits and experiences. The confident smile, the reflective gaze, the familiar lines. They may merely be echoes of a past self that has long since evolved and perhaps disappeared altogether. When you confront the mirror with this awareness, a strange sensation washes over you. It is as if the mirror has become a portal, not to reveal a hidden truth about your physical form, but to expose the illusion that you have always been something static and complete. Instead, you begin to see that your identity is fluid, ever-changing, and perhaps even non-existent in the way you have imagined it. You realize that the self you have been so sure of is, in fact, an ephemeral narrative. A story you continue to tell yourself day after day. This realization may be unsettling. After all, the idea that your identity is not fixed strikes at the very core of how you've understood your place in the world. The mirror, which once offered reassurance, now becomes a symbol of impermanence. Every time you glance at it, the image shifts, and with each flicker, the assumption of a stable, immutable self is undermined. But this isn't necessarily a reason to despair. In fact, it might be a doorway to a deeper freedom. If you let go of the need to identify with a singular, unchanging self, you open yourself up to an entirely new way of being. Without the burden of a fixed identity, you are free to evolve, to adapt, and to experience life without the constraints of a limiting story. The mirror then no longer serves as a judge of who you are, but as a reminder of the creative and dynamic nature of existence. Take a moment now to reflect on your own experience. Think back over your life, the milestones, the achievements, even the struggles. How many of those defining moments can you say are permanent? How many aspects of your personality have remained unchanged over the years? If you examine your past closely, you might notice that what you once thought was you has transformed time and again. The passions, the fears, the ambitions. They have all shifted, sometimes imperceptibly, other times dramatically. The mirror today challenges you to see that constant change is the only constant. It dares you to accept that the self you recognize is merely a temporary configuration, a transient emergence in the vast swirling flux of life. And once you embrace that uncertainty, a profound liberation arises. No longer are you bound by the rigid labels and stories that have defined you. Instead, you are invited to inhabit a space of pure awareness, where the boundaries between who you are and who you might become dissolve into possibility. So, the next time you stand before the mirror, don't rush to cling to the familiar image. Instead, Allow yourself to be present with the shifting, fluid reflection. Notice how it changes with your breath, with the light, with the movements of your eyes. Recognize that every change is a part of the process, a small reminder that life itself is ever unfolding and that the self is not a final destination but a continuous journey. Ask yourself, what if the you in the mirror is just one chapter in a long, unwritten story? What if the truth lies not in holding on to a fixed image, but in embracing the mystery of constant becoming? And what if by letting go of the need to define yourself by that image, you can truly start to live in each present moment, unburdened by the weight of past identities or future expectations? In that sense, the mirror that won't reflect a fixed self is not a curse, it is a gift. It offers you the chance to witness the infinite potential within you, a range of possibilities that extends far beyond any single snapshot of identity. It invites you to see that the essence of who you are is not captured in a mirror at all, but in the quiet space between thoughts, the pause between breaths, and the awareness that underlies all experience. Thus, the next time you catch a reflection, remember that it is not the complete story of you. It is only a momentary glimpse, a visual metaphor for something far more profound. A reminder that the self you think you are is as changeable as the light dancing on the surface of water. And in that realization you might just find not despair, but the freedom to be something new, something vibrant, something unbound by the confines of a single, unyielding identity. When you finally let go of the assumption that there's a permanent you behind the mirror, you step into a greater truth. A truth that isn't measured by reflections, but by the depth of your inner awareness. A truth that whispers, softly but persistently, you are not defined by the face in the mirror. You are the ever-changing light that makes that reflection possible. You feel it in your chest, a heaviness, a pull, a swirl of meaning that seems too powerful to be dismissed. Maybe it's heartbreak, maybe it's longing, maybe it's awe or grief or love so strong it makes your eyes well up without warning. And in those moments, you don't question their truth. You assume, this is real. This is the core of me. This is who I am at my deepest. Because emotion feels like the bottom of the well, the part of you untouched by logic or pretense. The part that screams, this is real because I feel it. But what if it's not? What if the emotions you feel so deeply, especially the dramatic ones, aren't proof of your depth, but a device, a script embedded in the dream to keep you hooked? Think about it. What's the one thing that guarantees you stay invested in a story? Emotion. Not facts, not logic, not structure, but feeling. You stay in a movie because it pulls at you. You turn the page of a book because you want to know what happens to the character you're now attached to. You keep watching a series because it makes you feel something, even if that feeling is heartbreak, anger, despair, hope. Emotion is the glue, and the same might be true of the dream you call life. The heartbreaks, the ecstatic highs, the nostalgia, the sudden waves of sadness for no reason. What if they aren't evidence of inner truth? What if they're tools? Hooks, emotional plot devices generated by the dream to keep the you engaged in the simulation. Because here's the strange thing about emotions, they often show up before there's a clear cause. You cry without knowing why, you wake up anxious without anything actually happening, you feel an overwhelming sense of loss even when nothing's been lost. And the mind scrambles to assign meaning. It says, oh, I must feel this way because... And then it builds a story. But what if the story is just a cover? What if the emotion came first and the story was constructed afterward to make it make sense? Just like dreams. In a dream, something terrifying happens and you feel deep fear, but when you wake up, the fear fades, because the meaning evaporates. The dream collapses and the emotions collapse with it. So what if waking life is just a more elaborate dream, with more convincing emotional cues? What if the grief that feels like a black hole is just the next chapter in the emotional arc that keeps you believing the story is real? What if the ache of nostalgia is the dream's way of deepening your attachment to a version of yourself that never truly existed? What if your sadness, your joy, your longing are just the colors of the illusion, no less intense, no less beautiful, but no more real than the rain in last night's dream? That doesn't mean emotions are meaningless, it means they are compelling, and that's the point. They keep the character alive, they keep the script engaging, they keep the simulation immersive. And when you forget that, you become hypnotized. You think the sadness is you. You think the joy is proof of something eternal. You think the love defines you. But behind every feeling is the watcher, and the watcher does not feel. Not in the way the character does. The watcher sees the emotion arise and fall, like waves, like weather, like scenes in a movie. And when you identify with the watcher, not the one who feels, but the one who sees the feeling, you're no longer seduced by depth. You're free to feel fully, without getting lost in it. You're free to cry, but also to know that the tears are happening in a dream. You're free to ache, but not mistake the ache for who you are, because you are not the grief. You are not the longing. You are not the nostalgia. You are the stillness that sees it all, and in that stillness you realize something profound. The emotion is not depth, awareness is. And awareness doesn't need to perform. It doesn't need a storyline. It doesn't need sadness to feel meaningful. It just is. So now look at the feelings you've been carrying, the emotional weight you've mistaken for soul, the heartbreak you've glorified as proof of being real. Can you see it as part of the dream? Can you watch it unfold without clinging to its story? Because the moment you do, it loses its grip. Not because it's false, but because it's not you. It's just the script, just the play, just the soundtrack of a dream that doesn't want you to wake up. And yet, here you are, waking up anyway. There's something inside you that sees. It's not loud. It doesn't shout. It doesn't even move. It just watches. When your thoughts race, it watches. When your heart breaks, it watches. When your body shakes with laughter or sinks into despair, it watches. It's always there. But here's the strange thing. It never does anything. It never judges, never interrupts, never takes control. It doesn't tell you to stop thinking. It doesn't fix the sadness. It just sees. And in that seeing, there's a kind of mystery. Because if something in you can observe everything that happens, your thoughts, your body, your emotions, then that something can't be any of those things. It's not your mind, it sees the mind. It's not your feelings, it sees your feelings. It's not your actions, it sees you act, without getting involved. So who is that? What is that? It's not a person. It doesn't have a name, it has no face, no opinions, no agenda. It just is. And when everything else changes, your moods, your beliefs, your story, that part of you stays exactly the same, still, unmoved, silent. It doesn't try to improve your life. It doesn't try to save you. It doesn't need things to get better or worse. It just watches. And that might sound useless, powerless, like some passive observer floating in the background, but look deeper, because in that stillness is your only true freedom. The moment you remember the watcher, you're no longer trapped in the performance. You're no longer lost in the thoughts, no longer owned by the emotions. You're simply witnessing the flow without being swept away by it. And that changes everything, because when you don't identify with the chaos, you don't suffer from it in the same way. The pain might still be there, the fear might still arise, but you don't become it. You see it. And in that gap, in that sacred distance, suffering loses its grip, not because life stops being painful, but because you've stopped confusing yourself with the pain. You are not the storm. You are the sky that watches it pass. And when you live from that sky, life becomes spacious. You stop needing to control everything. You stop chasing peace like it's something outside you, because you realize peace was never missing. It was just buried under all the noise. And the watcher, the presence, was there all along. Watching you try to fix what didn't need fixing. Watching you try to become what you already are. Watching you run in circles, trying to reach a destination that's always been here. You can feel it right now, can't you? That awareness, that part of you that's just listening, not reacting, not analyzing, just here. It doesn't need to figure anything out. It doesn't need to achieve anything, because it's already whole, already present, already free. And maybe that's the final trick of the dream. It convinces you that you have to do something to wake up, to meditate more, to heal more, to think less, to be better. But the watcher doesn't need any of that, because the watcher is already awake. Always has been. Even in your deepest confusion, it was still there, untouched. So what if that's the real you? Not the thinker, not the doer, not the persona, but the quiet awareness beneath it all, the one that doesn't interfere, the one that doesn't need to, because it knows life is already happening, thought is already unfolding, the dream is already dreaming, and its job isn't to change any of it. Its job is to witness, and somehow, in that witnessing, everything softens, everything slows down, everything becomes enough. So the next time you're overwhelmed or lost or chasing clarity, stop. Not to fix anything, not to escape, but just to remember. There's something in you that sees it all. And that something is already free, already still, already home. You don't have to become it. You already are. You've been here before, haven't you? You're walking down a street in a city you've never visited, but something about it feels familiar. The curve of the road, the way the sunlight hits the windows, the sound of someone laughing in the distance. It all feels like a memory, but you know it isn't. Or maybe it is, but not in the way you think. We call it déjà vu, a glitch, a trick of the brain, a fragment of perception mistakenly categorized as a memory. But what if it's more than that? What if this strange feeling of familiarity, the eerie sense that you've been here, seen this, known this before, is not a flaw in your mind, but a signal? Because dreams do this all the time. They invent entire worlds that feel old. They stitch together fragments of places you've never been and somehow make them feel like home. You walk through a dream city and know the way even though it doesn't exist. You meet someone with a face you don't recognize, yet you're certain you've known them forever. This is the architecture of the dream, blending invention with memory, mixing what never happened with what feels deeply true, and it's so convincing that when you wake up, you carry the emotion of the dream with you, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. Now, take a step back. What if waking life does the same thing? What if this reality is no more fixed than the one behind your eyelids? What if your sense of familiarity isn't just memory, it's fabrication? Or perhaps echoes of other versions of you, other timelines, other dreams, other stories still playing out just beyond the veil of this one. That moment when you look at a stranger and feel a flood of emotion, recognition, fear, longing. You don't know why, but it's real. Or the house you enter for the first time that already feels like yours. Or a place you pass by that stirs something ancient in your bones. How do you explain that? Memory, imagination, or something deeper? Maybe you've lived this before, or maybe you're dreaming it now. The boundaries blur, the stories leak into each other, and what we call familiarity might be the soul remembering its own fingerprints across dimensions. You think time is linear, but it isn't. You think your experiences are unique, but they're not. You are walking through a hall of mirrors, And sometimes the mirror reflects something you haven't consciously seen yet, but your deeper self, it knows. It's been walking this spiral longer than you realize. So that stranger who feels familiar, maybe they were your friend in another dream. Maybe they were you. Maybe they never existed at all but were written into the script to remind you of something forgotten. Because sometimes the dream uses faces as symbols. It reuses them, repurposes them, combines a childhood friend with a movie character with a barista from last week, and suddenly your heart leaps and you don't know why. You think you're recognizing a person, but maybe you're recognizing a pattern, a signature in the dream, a hidden message only your unconscious can decode. And those places that feel like home, maybe they are, not geographically but energetically. Maybe they reflect something buried inside you, something you once called yours in another lifetime, another dream, another flicker of awareness. And that feeling of, I've been here before? Maybe you have. Not with your feet, but with your mind, or your soul. Or maybe the familiarity isn't coming from the place at all, maybe it's coming from you. Because when you become more present, when your awareness sharpens, you start to see more clearly, you pick up on subtleties, you start to notice the underlying blueprint of reality, and that blueprint doesn't change as much as you think. The names and faces do, the scenery doesn't. But the architecture of the experience, the way joy hits your chest, the way sorrow echoes in your bones, the way longing curls in your stomach, that stays the same. So when you say something feels familiar, maybe you're not remembering a thing, neighborly, you're remembering a frequency, an emotional geometry that has repeated itself so many times in your life that it imprints like a signature. And when life plays that note again, you know it. Like a song you forgot you loved. The stranger becomes familiar. The place becomes sacred. The moment becomes timeless. And this is how the dream keeps you enchanted. It doesn't always need to shock you to keep you in the story. Sometimes it lures you with recognition, with warmth, with the promise that you're returning to something even if you don't know what. But here's the secret. You're not returning to a place. You're returning to awareness, that quiet space inside you that watches it all. Because that's the one thing that has been here before, through all versions of you, through all faces, through all dreams. The watcher, the presence, the awareness that says, this feels familiar because I've never truly left. You haven't. You've just been asleep. So the next time you feel that pull, that strange emotional gravity towards someone, someplace or something you can't explain, don't dismiss it. But don't romanticize it either. Just notice. Breathe into it. Let the moment unfold without needing to name it. Maybe it's an old friend from a forgotten life. Maybe it's just your nervous system repeating a loop. Or maybe it's the dream touching its own reflection. Maybe you're not remembering a moment at all. Maybe you're remembering yourself, not as a story, but as the one who sees it all. And in that recognition, everything becomes familiar. Because in truth, none of this is new, and none of this is strange. It's only hidden. Until you look close enough to remember, you've been here all along. You think you know how you got here. There's a timeline, a journey, a path full of wins, losses, lessons. Maybe it was painful, maybe it was hard-earned, but it feels yours. Like something you lived through, something that shaped you. The story makes sense. The childhood that gave you your wounds, the relationships that built your patterns, the turning points that taught you strength, or broke you, or both. It feels true. But here's the question nobody asks. What if it wasn't? What if the memory of your journey, the long path you think brought you to this moment, wasn't something you walked, but something that was written after the moment already existed? Like a movie starting in the middle, and the first half was just filled in later to give the scene meaning. What if your mind didn't carry you here? What if it backfilled the story? just to convince you that you arrived. Think about it. Have you ever had a dream so vivid, so emotionally real that when you woke up you could remember a whole backstory that unfolded before the dream began? You're in a room with people you know, but you've never seen them before. You're fighting for something that matters, though you never decided to. There's tension, or love, or grief, and somehow you know why, even though none of it happened. The dream supplies a context, a sense of history, but it's fabricated, inserted just in time to make the scene feel deep. What if your waking life does the same thing? What if this moment, the one you're in right now, is the starting point, and everything you think led to it was written afterward? Not faked, not meaningless, but manufactured, stitched together to make you believe the moment is earned, because meaning feels stronger when it has a struggle behind it. So the mind gives you one. The dream writes its own backstory. That's why you can't find the beginning. No matter how far back you search, it always feels like you started somewhere before that. Your childhood? Well, something happened before that. Your birth? You were already becoming. Your ancestry? Even that was built on something prior. It never stops. Because maybe it never started. Maybe the idea of a journey of progress, of history, is a narrative device, not a truth. And you, the character, believe in that device so completely that you never notice it might have been pasted in. Because a life without a backstory feels flat, incomplete, empty. So the mind fills it in with emotion, with pain, with detail, so you don't question its reality. But here's what's wild. The only proof of your past is the memory of it. And memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, you rebuild it. With edits, with bias, with invention, the memory becomes a living story. But a story isn't a fact. It's a performance. And your identity, your sense of, I am this person because of what I've lived, it's built on those stories. So who are you without them? If the backstory is optional, if it was just a context drop to make this moment feel dramatic, then what remains? You. Because in truth, you are not your past. You're not the journey. You're not the story of how you got here. You are the consciousness that sees the story unfold, even if it started 1 second ago, even if there was never a beginning, even if the past is just scaffolding built around a single frame of awareness to give it weight. You think you've earned this moment, that you've suffered enough to deserve it. But maybe that's the dream's trick. Maybe the dream makes you believe in earning, so you'll stay invested, but presence doesn't need to be earned. Reality doesn't need a resume. You're already here. You're already real, not because of what came before, but because you're aware now. That's the only truth that can't be faked. Everything else is theater. So if the story drops away, if your memory went blank, if your past dissolved, what's left? Still you. Still this. Still the watcher. Still the stillness. Because presence doesn't rely on a backstory, it never did. That's why babies are so peaceful. They haven't learned the plot yet. They just are. And that's why so many spiritual traditions point to the now. Not the history, not the narrative, but the this. Right here. Because this is the only place that doesn't need to justify itself. It just exists. And so do you. So maybe it doesn't matter how you got here. Maybe there is no how. Maybe you've always been here. And the story, it's beautiful, emotional, meaningful, but it's also just that, a story. And you're the space it's written in, and you're in a dream. And something's off. Maybe the colors are too rich. Maybe a person says something that doesn't add up. Or maybe you suddenly realize you can't remember how you got here. Your awareness sharpens. You begin to question, wait, is this a dream? And just as you start to wake up, something happens. You get pulled away. A loud noise, a new scene, an emotional twist that drags your attention back into the story. The dream resists being seen, like it knows you're about to pierce the illusion, and it has to defend itself. So it distracts you, it adds drama, it spins up urgency, it rehooks your attention. And just like that, you forget you were even questioning it. You're back in the performance, back in the fog, back in the script. What if waking life does the exact same thing? Have you ever had a moment, just a brief second, where something inside you felt that none of this was real, that life itself had a strange echo to it, a flicker of surreal stillness in the middle of your day, and then gone? Because right as you begin to sense that something isn't quite as it seems, the phone rings, an email pings, you remember you're late for a meeting, someone cuts you off in traffic, and your awareness is hijacked, again, not violently, not loudly. Just enough, just subtle enough to keep you from falling through the cracks of the dream, because the dream has defense mechanisms, not like a villain guarding a fortress, but more like a clever storyteller who knows exactly when to shift scenes, introduce tension, or use emotional bait. It keeps you interested, it keeps you distracted, it keeps you from asking the one question that could collapse the whole narrative: is any of this real? Because that question doesn't just challenge the scene, it challenges the set, the lights, the cast, the very stage beneath your feet. And the moment you begin to ask it sincerely, not as a philosophical exercise but from a deep intuitive place, the dream gets nervous. It throws something at you. A problem to solve, a desire to chase, a crisis to fix, a pain to numb. And just like that, you're busy again. You're invested again. Illusion repairs itself, and you forget that you are seconds away from seeing through it, because the illusion is brilliant. It doesn't try to fight your awakening head-on. It simply offers you something else to care about. And you do. You care about your relationships, your career, your past, your body, your goals, your reputation, your pain. It gives you an endless buffet of identity to choose from, an infinite playlist of thoughts and distractions and roles to wear. Do, because it's convincing, because the stakes feel real, because the emotions feel raw. But once in a while, you remember, you pause, you stare at a tree too long, you notice how time doesn't feel linear, you feel the hollowness behind your to-do list, you catch the rhythm of a world that feels more like a dream than a destination. And in that moment, you're this close to waking up, to stepping back, to seeing the whole thing as a kind of performance. And then, distracted, obligation, temptation. The dream pulls you back in. It's not malicious, it's just good at what it does. It's built to hold your attention. Because that's what keeps it running, your attention, your belief, your emotional investment. And the moment you withdraw those things, even a little, it starts to crumble. Not in a bad way, but a freeing way. A dissolving of false urgency, a soft unraveling of identity, a gentle remembering of who you were before the script, before the noise, before the storyline. And that's when the real noticing happens, when you realize the dream was only ever doing one thing, keeping you from noticing that you're already awake, that the awareness, the watcher, the still presence behind your eyes was never asleep. Only the character was. Only the belief in the performance was. And once you see that, you don't need to fight the dream, you just stop falling for it. You walk through it with open eyes. You let it play out, without letting it own you. You see the distraction for what it is. Not an enemy, not a trap. Just scenery. And suddenly everything gets lighter. You're no longer pulled. You're no longer lost. You're here, noticing, still. And the dream? It can try all it wants to keep you engaged, but it can't unsee what you've seen. It can't rebind what has already been untied. Because the one who sees has remembered. And that's all it takes. You expect dreams to be messy. Scenes jump around, people shift shapes, the laws of physics forget themselves. You wake up and laugh. Of course it was a dream, it made no sense. So your brain builds a rule. Confusion equals dream. Coherence equals real. But what if that's backward? What if seamlessness is the real deception? Think about it. Your life unfolds with perfect continuity. The clock ticks, the sun rises. Your memory tracks everything in a neat cause and effect line. Your name stays the same, your house doesn't morph, your relationships follow predictable patterns, and so you believe this must be real. But that's the trap. Because an illusion becomes most convincing when it leaves no cracks, not when it's flawed, when it's flawless. Imagine a dream that doesn't glitch. No talking cats, no melting walls, just consistency, clarity, a memory of yesterday, a plan for tomorrow, a perfectly logical storyline. Would you ever question it? Would you even know it's a dream? Probably not. Because your guard is down. You're not looking for the seams because there aren't any. That's the genius of it, and maybe that's why waking life feels so stable, so convincingly real. Not because it is, but because it's the perfect disguise. We think reality is marked by order, patterns, causality, reason. But what if all of that is just scaffolding? A structure designed to keep you from looking too closely. Because if it's too smooth, too perfect, too well constructed, you won't examine it. You'll trust it. You'll build a life on top of it. And that's the point. You don't question the rules of a game when you're deeply immersed in playing it. You don't analyze the code when the interface works flawlessly. And you don't inspect the illusion when it gives you the illusion of control. But here's the thing. Even the best designed illusions have one weakness. They rely on your belief. And belief thrives in comfort, in familiarity, in seamlessness. So if the dream wants to remain hidden, it doesn't need to confuse you. Everything's fine, everything's stable, everything makes sense. And the moment you believe that, you stop looking, you stop wondering, you stop waking up. But here's the paradox. It's often in the cracks where truth shines through. The awkward pause in conversation, the déjà vu that lingers too long, the moment when your thoughts feel like they're arriving before you think them. Those are the glitches. Not big ones, not dreamlike absurdities, just subtle tears in the script. But instead of questioning them, most people patch them up. That's weird, they say, anyway, and the illusion repairs itself. Because it's seamless by design. But what if you stopped trusting that design? What if instead of being comforted by how consistent reality is, you became suspicious of it? Not paranoid. Sophisticated, just curious, because no dream wants to be noticed, and the best dreams are the ones that don't feel like dreams at all, the ones where the texture is just right. The physics behave, the memories come preloaded, and the script follows perfect emotional arcs. So perfect, in fact, that you feel seen, moved, healed. But even that might be part of it, because dreams can't survive disinterest. They thrive on your involvement. And nothing pulls you in deeper than emotional coherence. Nothing keeps you hooked like a story that fits together too well. So maybe the real red flag isn't when things fall apart. It's when they never do. When the system self-corrects too quickly. When the world feels a little too tidy. When the logic clicks a little too perfectly. That's not truth. That's architecture. That's the seamless illusion. And once you see it for what it is, it doesn't mean life loses its meaning. It means you stop mistaking the script for the screen. You stop mistaking the movie for the light projecting it. You realize it's not about destroying the illusion, it's about no longer being owned by it. So the next time life feels eerily coherent, when everything lines up just so, pause. Don't look for what's wrong, look for what's too right. And ask, what's hiding behind this perfection? Because truth rarely wears makeup. It doesn't need to convince you, it just is. And often it's found in the messiness. The silence, the subtle dissonance. Not in the seamless story you're being shown, but in the awareness that's quietly watching it all unfold. The awareness that doesn't need the dream to break to know it's dreaming. It just needs you to remember. Sometimes the deepest illusion is the one that never looks like one. You have a story. It's the one you carry with you, the one you tell others when they ask, "So, who are you?" It begins with where you were born, who raised you, what happened to you. You speak of the highs and lows, the trauma, the triumph, the losses you endured, the lessons you learned, and somewhere in that long thread of memory and meaning, there's a person, you, a self. And you don't just remember that story, you believe in it, because without it, who would you be? This is what no one tells you. Your story isn't something you have, it's something you are inside of. You're not the writer looking down at the script. You're the character the script is keeping alive. And that script, it's not just about recounting what happened. It's about justifying your identity. You think you're the protagonist because the story is centered around you, but what if it's the other way around? What if the character only exists because the story is playing? What if the you that you protect, explain, and defend is manufactured by narrative momentum, a self that doesn't just remember the past but is held together by it? Because without the plot, the identity collapses. The mind can't stand that. So it builds, it edits, it rearranges facts and feelings to make the story coherent, so you feel consistent, so you feel like someone, so you can say, "This is me, this is how I became who I am." But pause. Ask yourself something radical. What if none of it is real? Not fake, like lies, but unreal, like a set built on a soundstage. A beautiful illusion made of memories, meanings, and motives, all designed not to reflect a self, but to sustain one. Think about it. You feel angry. The mind says, "You've always had a temper. Remember that time in 8th grade?" You feel afraid. The mind says, "You've always been cautious. Remember how your father raised you?" The emotion comes first. Then the story comes to justify it. The self is not the source of the story. The story is the machine that generates the self. And it never stops. Because if the plot halts, if the narrator goes silent, if the memories stop repeating, you don't just lose the story, you lose the one it was about. And that's terrifying, because we cling to identity like it's oxygen, even when it hurts, even when it limits us. We would rather feel consistent than feel free. We would rather protect the narrative than let it fall apart. So we relive it, we rehearse it. We tell ourselves again and again who we are, what we've been through, what we can or can't become. And the story gets tighter, thicker, more believable. You think you're growing, evolving, but often you're just refining the script, adding depth to the character, adding detail to the world, but never asking who's watching the play. And that's the question the story doesn't want you to ask, because the moment you stop identifying with the character, the whole plot begins to wobble. The tension dissolves, the mission fades, the emotional arc unravels, and suddenly the need to keep being someone disappears. You just are, not as a person, not as a personality, but as presence, as space, as awareness that doesn't need to be explained. But most people never reach that stillness, because the story is too loud, too sticky, too addictive. It keeps pulling them in. Every feeling has a reason. Every behavior has a backstory, every identity has a narrative, and the cycle continues. You suffer, you look for meaning, the mind gives you a reason, you feel seen, but the reason reinforces the character, and the character deepens the story. And the story prolongs the illusion. You think you're waking up, but really you're just updating the plot, giving the dream better graphics, smoother transitions, more sophisticated arcs, but it's still a dream. Because what's missing isn't detail. What's missing is distance. The ability to watch the story play without needing to be in it. The ability to feel the pain, but not build an identity around it. the ability to see the plot and know it's not you. That's where freedom lives. In the watcher, in the space behind the story. Because the story never stops. But you can stop being it. You can witness the self without clinging to it. You can hear the narrator without obeying it. You can feel the emotion without forming a new chapter around it. And when you do, something beautiful happens. You stop being a character in a drama. You start becoming the silence that holds it all. Not a blank nothingness, but a spacious everything, where thoughts are allowed to rise, where feelings can unfold, where identity can appear and dissolve, without needing to be fixed, where the plot can play out, but doesn't define the screen. And in that space, you're not a name, not a story, not a role. You're just this awareness, this breath, this now. Nothing to protect, nothing to prove, nothing to remember. Because the story is beautiful, but it's not you. It was never you. It only ever existed to convince you that you were someone. But now you see, you don't need to be anyone to be everything. There's a question you were about to ask. You felt it. It rose like a whisper in the back of your mind. You didn't form it in words, not yet. It was just a flicker of curiosity, a strange shift, a pause in the rhythm, and then it was gone, replaced by a thought, a notification, a yawn, a distraction. You moved on. But something deep inside still remembers that question, not the words, not the logic, but the feeling of something vital almost reaching the surface, almost breaking through. We're taught to believe that questions arise from within us, that we form them when we're ready, that we ask when we want to know. But what if that's not true? What if the most important questions, the real ones, never even get the chance, because something inside you or something around you blocks them, before they fully arrive, before you can even articulate them, because some questions are dangerous, not to you, but to the story, to the illusion, to the structure of the dream itself. The dream thrives on rhythm, on continuity, on momentum. And the real question, a question that shakes your foundation, is like a knife through that rhythm. It doesn't just cause discomfort, it threatens collapse. So the system defends itself, not with force, with redirection, distraction, fatigue, overthinking. You'll notice this when you're close, when you feel a strange pressure in your chest, or a pause in the flow of thought, like something's trying to rise, but can't. You'll feel it in those quiet moments, when you're alone, when you're staring out the window, when your guard is down. A thought begins to form, not a thought you constructed, but something that arrives, like a foreign signal leaking into your awareness. It carries no name, but it holds a weight. And if you could ask it, if you could finish it, it would unmake something in you. Maybe an identity, maybe a belief, maybe the idea of who you've always thought you were. But instead of forming, it dissolves. Your attention is pulled, a memory returns, a task demands your focus, and just like that, the question vanishes, as if it never was. But it was, and it still is, beneath the surface, because awareness doesn't forget, even if the mind does. So what are these questions? They're not clever, they're not philosophical, they're not the ones you ask in debate, or in therapy, or in books. They're the ones that cut beneath all of that. They're the questions that don't reinforce the self, they erase it. Questions like, what if I'm not the one thinking these thoughts? What if I never actually chose any of this? What if this life, this identity, is a loop I didn't create, but inherited? Who am I if I stop rehearsing my story? What is this awareness that's been watching everything silently for as long as I can remember? These aren't questions you answer. They're questions that change the atmosphere. They don't lead to new conclusions. They lead to disorientation, to silence, to stillness. And in that stillness, the illusion starts to crack. Because the dream isn't held together by truth, it's held together by inattention. by your constant movement, your constant investment. The moment you stop and let the unasked question complete itself, you pierce the veil, even for a second. And for the dream, that's fatal. That's why it resists. That's why it interrupts. That's why your phone lights up right when your mind begins to wander into something real. The unasked question isn't missing. It's being suppressed, and not by a villain, not by a system, but by the dream's own survival instinct. Because if you ask it, if you really sit with it, everything changes. You stop being the character. You stop needing the story to make sense. You stop needing to be someone. And that kind of freedom, the illusion can't survive it. So instead it offers you other questions, safe ones, questions with answers, questions that keep you inside the narrative. What should I do? Why did this happen to me? How do I fix this? How do I become better? All of these questions sound deep. They sound like awakening, but they're not. They're loops. They keep you engaged. They keep the story alive, because they're still based on the assumption that the character is real, that the self needs improvement, that the plot matters. But the unasked questions don't care about any of that. They don't come to fix. They come to end, to dissolve, to empty. And in that emptiness, you remember something older than language, something older than identity. You remember that awareness has always been here, and it doesn't need a name. It doesn't need a story. It doesn't need permission to exist. It just is. And maybe that's what the unasked question is trying to say. You were never the one asking. You were the space the question tried to reach. So stop waiting for the right time. Stop waiting to be ready. Stop waiting for the question to form in perfect words. Instead, listen. Not with your ears, not with your thoughts, with your stillness, with your silence. Because the question is already here. It's not arriving, it's remembering. And the moment you stop chasing the next idea, the next goal, the next version of yourself, you might finally hear it. Not as a sentence, but as a shift, a pause. A truth so pure it doesn't need to be spoken. Only noticed, only felt, only lived. And once it's asked, even once, nothing can ever be the same again. You think you've woken up. There was a moment, a flash of clarity, where you saw through everything. You realized the world was a dream, the ego was an illusion, and you were not your thoughts, not your past, not your roles. And in that moment, something lifted. The fog cleared, your identity softened, and you felt awake, conscious, free. But then something strange happens. That feeling fades. The clarity becomes memory. The insight becomes a concept. And soon, you're chasing that same experience all over again, reading more books, watching more videos, meditating longer, talking about non-duality or ego death or presence, like you've got a backstage pass to enlightenment. But underneath it all, something still feels off. Something still itches, because deep down, a quiet voice is whispering, what if this awakening was just another mask? What if the realization that felt like freedom was still part of the dream? What if the idea that you woke up was just the next scene in the illusion, cleverly written to make you think you escaped, but you didn't escape. You just switched costumes. You traded one identity for another, only this one is sneakier. It doesn't look like ego, it looks like wisdom. It doesn't sound like grasping, it sounds like transcendence. But it's still a self, it's still a role, and that role comes with its own rules. I'm someone who knows now. I'm someone who doesn't fall for the illusion. I'm someone who's further along than others. And just like that, the dream resets, the story continues. Because the mind loves labels, even the spiritual ones. It loves identity, even the enlightened kind. It loves certainty, even if it's about being uncertain. And so, the dream gives you a new mask, one made of insight, one that feels like waking up. But it's not, because real awakening doesn't need a label. It doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't even feel like a moment. It's not an event you remember. It's a shift you can't describe. And most of all, it doesn't make you feel superior. It doesn't make you feel finished. It humbles you. It empties you. It dissolves the very idea that there was anyone to awaken in the first place. But the dream knows how to fake that. It knows how to simulate awakening. It knows how to mimic stillness, posture, detachment. It knows how to let you play the one who sees. And that version of you becomes addicted to its own image, to its own language, to its own performance. You start curating your speech, your thoughts, your emotions. You avoid low-frequency feelings. You strive to stay in the now. You try to maintain a high vibration. But all of this effort, all of this control, all of this consciousness, it's just another dream, another identity, another story with a new costume. This time, you're not the victim, or the achiever, or the lover, or the orphan. You're the awakened one. And because it looks so clean, so sacred, you don't question it. You wear the mask proudly. You post about presence. You speak slowly. You sit with stillness. But inside, you're still chasing, still performing, still believing in the character. The only difference now is that the character is spiritual. But here's the raw truth. As long as there's a you who's awake, you're still dreaming. Because awakening isn't something that happens to a person. It's what remains when the person dissolves. It's not something you achieve. It's what's always been here, before the story, before the seeking, before the illusion of I. So if you truly woke up, there wouldn't be anyone left to say, I woke up. There wouldn't be a self who is now aware. There would just be awareness, unlabeled, undivided, quiet. But that doesn't feed the ego. That doesn't feel like a plot twist. That doesn't get you followers or a seat at the guru table. So the dream gives you something else, a fake awakening. And it's so convincing, you stop looking, you stop questioning, you mistake the insight for the end of the journey. But real awakening doesn't come with a narrative. It's not a badge. It's not a lifestyle. It's not a stage of development. It's a death, the death of the one who needs a story at all. So if you're still tracking your growth, if you're still collecting spiritual milestones, if you're still comparing your frequency to someone else's, you're not free. You're just dreaming in a prettier costume. And that's okay. This isn't shame, this is a reminder, a gentle disruption. Because there's nothing wrong with playing roles. The problem is forgetting that they're roles. And the awakened self is still a role. It's still a mask. And sometimes it's the hardest one to take off because it tells you you already have. But the moment you see it, really see it, not with judgment, not with panic, but with stillness, it falls away. Because you don't need to escape the dream. You just need to stop believing in the one who thinks it's real, the one who claims to have awakened, the one who narrates the journey from behind spiritual eyes. Let that one go. Let the mask fall. Let the silence return. And in that silence, something truer than awakening arises. Not a moment, not a breakthrough, not a shift, just absence. Absence of story, absence of identity, absence of the one who needs to get it. And what remains is not you, it's what's beneath you, what's always been here, watching, still, unmoved, unimpressed by your spiritual insights, unaffected by your spiritual struggles. Because it doesn't need to awaken, it is awakeness, and it never wore a mask. You believe you're in control. You make choices. You set goals. You weigh pros and cons, feel confident or uncertain, and finally, you decide. It feels personal, deliberate, like you are the one writing your own script. But what if you're not? What if you're not the author of your story? What if you're just the character, reading each line as it appears, believing you're the one who wrote it? Let that sink in. Because this isn't just a philosophical idea. It's the unraveling of the deepest illusion you carry, the illusion of agency, of choice, of control. And when that illusion starts to dissolve, what you're left with isn't powerlessness. It's something far stranger, freedom that has nothing to do with control. Let's go back to the moment you decide something. Maybe you're choosing to text someone. Maybe you're deciding to leave a relationship. Maybe you're picking a career path. You weigh your options. You think through the consequences. You tell yourself stories about what's right and what's you. Then, at last, you choose. It feels like a free act. But what if the choice happened before you thought it? What if your brain fired the signal before your conscious mind caught up? Because that's what neuroscience keeps finding. That your sense of agency, the feeling that you decided, is a postscript, a retroactive caption. Your consciousness justifies the action after the action has already begun. It's like watching a movie and thinking you're writing the script because you feel emotionally invested. You're not in charge. You're in sync. You're narrating a process you don't control. And here's the twist. That narration becomes your identity. You begin to believe that voice in your head is the source of your life. When it's just the commentary, you're not the author. You're not even the actor. You're the reader. And the story is unfolding without your input. Not in a deterministic, robotic way, but in a mysterious, spontaneous flow. Things arise. Actions happen. Words come out of your mouth. Thoughts appear. And only afterward you claim them. You think they're yours, but are they? Where did that thought come from? Did you construct it, or did it show up unannounced? Where did your desire come from? Did you choose to want what you want, or did that want appear like a reflex? If you really had control, could you choose to stop wanting it? Could you stop thinking the thought? Could you unfeel the emotion? No. You can suppress. You can redirect, but the original appearance? That's not up to you, and that means the story isn't yours. It's being written, and you're inside of it. You're not at the keyboard. You're not behind the curtain. You're the character flipping the pages and believing you're inventing the plot. But it's already written, the arc, the choices, the turning points, the seeming randomness. It's all there, and your job isn't to steer it. Your job is to see it, to read it, to witness it without clinging to authorship. But we don't like that. We're addicted to being in control. We need to believe that we're the ones doing, the ones shaping, the ones changing the world through will and grit and clarity. We say things like, I chose this. I worked hard for this. I overcame my past. And maybe on the surface that looks true, but if you zoom out, way out, you'll notice something strange. You didn't choose your childhood. You didn't choose your genetics. You didn't choose your traumas, your conditioning, your culture, your nervous system. You didn't choose the language you think in, the concepts that shape your beliefs, the desires that drive your goals. All of it was given, all of it was installed. And you, this you that thinks it's steering the ship, is just the face on the screen, the cursor, not the coder, the puppet, not the puppeteer. But here's where it gets even weirder. Even the awareness of this isn't something you create, it arises to, and suddenly what you thought was a personal journey becomes a performance. A beautiful, painful, wild performance, but a performance nonetheless. And in that performance there is no one behind the mask, just the mask itself. Control. But from identification to observation. You stop being the I that chooses, you become the space where choices appear. You stop being the thinker, you become the screen the thoughts appear on. And when that shift happens, when the illusion of authorship drops, something astonishing is revealed. You were never meant to write the story. You were meant to witness it, to experience it, to walk through it like a lucid dream, not because you control the dream, but because you're aware that you're dreaming, and in that awareness there's peace. Because you no longer need to fix the plot. You no longer need to worry about getting it right. You no longer carry the burden of being in charge of something you never controlled in the first place. Instead, you live, fully, presently, not as the author, but as the field, the open sky that holds every scene. And that's real freedom. Not the power to direct, but the power to release, to rest in the mystery, to trust what arises, even the pain, even the chaos. Not because it makes sense, but because it's not yours, and never was. It's the story's, and you are not the storyteller. You are the stillness reading the tale, with eyes wide open. You've had moments of clarity, moments where something cracked open and the illusion thinned. You noticed your thoughts weren't really yours. You realized the self was just a story. You caught a glimpse of awareness without identity, just pure, quiet presence. And in those moments it felt like freedom, like you'd broken through, like the dream couldn't hold you anymore. But then life resumed. The ordinary returned. You went back to routines, to patterns, to old habits and familiar triggers. You told yourself, I just need to get back to that space again. But it's harder now. The techniques don't hit the same. The insights feel duller. The inner space feels crowded. And you wonder, what happened? What if I told you that the dream noticed? What if the illusion is not static but adaptive? What if it learns how to keep you? You see, most people imagine awakening like pulling back a curtain once and for all. But that's not how it works, because the dream isn't a thing you're trapped in, it's a living system, a reflexive, self-protective loop that responds to your awareness of it. Every time you get close to seeing it, it shifts, it distracts, it offers a new narrative, one that looks like escape, but isn't. You think you've left the matrix, only to find out you're in another layer of it. And that layer is sneakier, more beautiful, more spiritual, more convincing. You're not dreaming of normal life anymore. You're dreaming of awakening. And the dream is fine with that, because as long as you're still inside the structure, still believing, still seeking, still thinking in terms of identity, it doesn't care what you're chasing. Insight is fine, stillness is fine, as long as it becomes another part of the loop. Because every time you feel like you're getting it, that becomes the new trap. That sense of progress, that's the dream adjusting to make you stay. It gives you relief, then subtly pulls you back into effort, into identity, into the performance of being someone who's waking up. You don't even notice the shift, because it wears the same clothes as truth. It speaks the same language, dreamed, just like success was the dream, now awakening is the dream. It's just wearing white robes instead of a suit and tie. And this is what most people never see, that the dream mimics awakening, not to free you, but to keep you sedated, to keep you chasing. Because chasing keeps the dream alive, even if the thing you're chasing is freedom, especially if it's freedom, because freedom for the dream is dangerous. Not the idea of freedom, the actual experience of being free from the story. That kind of freedom unravels everything. It stops the game. It silences the seeker. It melts the character. And so, the dream defends itself, not by attacking you, by soothing you, by giving you just enough insight to feel like you've awakened, but not enough stillness to see through the one who's awakening. It gives you content, features, books, concepts. It gives you breakthroughs, a sense of progress, even spiritual community. But underneath it all, you're still dreaming, because you still believe the next step matters. You still think there's a you getting somewhere. You still think this is happening to someone, and that's how the dream survives. It becomes more subtle as you become more conscious, more beautiful, more refined, more poetic, but it's still a mask, still a loop, still a program that adjusts itself so you never ask the final question. What if there's nothing left to get? What if the one who seeks has always been part of the dream? Because when you ask that, really ask it, not as an idea, but as a surrender, the dream loses its grip, because it's not built to survive stillness. It's not built to survive presence without a person. It's not built to survive the one thing it cannot manipulate, pure, wordless, unconditioned awareness. And that's the key. The dream can absorb anything, except your refusal to play a role. Not a violent not rebellion, just the quiet stopping. Escape velocity, because when the dream sees it can't tempt you anymore. Not with fear, not with hope, not even with spiritual progress. It begins to collapse. Not in fire, not in drama, but in silence. Scene by scene it fades, because you're not feeding it anymore. You're not identifying with the one inside it. And that's the deepest truth. You were never the character trying to wake up. You were the space in which the whole drama appeared. You are not the dreamer. You are not the dream. You're what precedes both. And when you finally stop chasing out, up, or through, you realize you were never inside the dream to begin with. You were just watching, waiting, until you were still enough to remember. Not escape, just remember. Because the dream doesn't end with a final insight, it ends when you no longer need one. And then there's just this. The quiet, the awareness, the unmoving witness that the dream could never reach. You feel like you're growing. You've changed so much over the years. You don't react the same way you used to. You think deeper now. You're more aware, more open, more mindful. You've left old versions of yourself behind. The angry one, the naive one, the afraid one, the one who needed validation from everyone. You see your past mistakes, your old beliefs, and you smile. Because that's not you anymore. You've grown, or at least, that's the story you're telling. But what if that story is the trap? What if what you call growth is just a more sophisticated dream? What if you've only learned to decorate your illusion, to polish the edges of the mask, to loop the same awakening again and again, mistaking repetition for progress? What if change doesn't always mean liberation? What if evolution can be a beautifully disguised cycle? You wake up, you see something new, you let go of something old, and it feels like freedom. But the deeper truth? You're still inside the dream, because the one who's growing is still the character, still the identity, still the image you believe in. It's just become more complex, more noble, more subtle. You used to chase success, now you chase peace. You used to want approval, now you want detachment. You used to identify with your ego, now you identify with your healing. But in every case you're still identifying, still measuring yourself, still narrating the arc of a self who is going somewhere. And the dream loves that, because every time you think, I'm becoming, the dream knows you're still playing, still inside, still believing in time, in trajectory, in a character with a past and a future. And that's the hardest illusion to spot, because it feels so honest. It feels like movement, like work, like progress. You read more books, you unlearn trauma, you master a new language, you surround yourself with conscious people, and the dream gets quieter, but not because it's ending, because it's adapting. You've stopped screaming, but you're still narrating. You've stopped fighting, but you're still building identity. You've stopped running, but you're still on the treadmill. Only now the treadmill is branded as spiritual growth, healing, ascension, integration. It feels vertical, but it's circular. It feels like evolution, but it's orbit. You're orbiting a center you never question, the idea of self, not the toxic self, not the broken self, the growing self, the evolving self, the self that's almost there, the self that's one realization away from completion. And so you loop. One insight leads to another layer of shadow work. One release opens the door to a new childhood memory. One breakthrough invites a new integration process, and it feels like purpose, like peeling the onion, like waking up. But you never get to the core, because the moment you get close, the dream adds another layer. It hands you another mirror, another teacher, another pattern to unwind, and you accept it because it sounds true. And it feels true, but feeling true is the most powerful illusion of all. Because the dream is designed not to oppose your growth, but to replicate it, to mimic progress, to give you just enough space, just enough insight, just enough movement that you stay invested, stay enrolled, stay in the game, so you never ask the one question that ends the cycle: what if there's no one growing? What if the self that evolves is the illusion? Because the dream can handle your pain, it can handle your trauma, it can even handle your healing. What it cannot handle is your silence, your emptiness, your refusal to become. The dream can't survive if you stop needing a self to improve, if you stop narrating a journey, if you stop chasing a future version of yourself. It needs you to keep growing. Because growing means you still believe there's someone there to change. But the truth, awakening, isn't growth. It's collapse. It's the collapse of the one who needs to evolve. It's the recognition that even your most noble intentions to heal, to rise, to align, are still playing into the identity loop. They're still assuming the story matters. They're still building a you that can be tracked, admired, respected, even if it's just by yourself. But what happens when you stop? Not regress, not numb out, not dissociate, just stop. When you stop needing to fix, shape, ascend, evolve, or become anything at all. What happens then? Was no one to grow in the first place, there was only awareness. Only the screen, only the unmoving field on which all these versions of you danced. And they were beautiful. They meant something, but they weren't you. They were echoes, costumes, stories told inside a dream of becoming. And when you stop narrating, you wake up. Not to a better version of yourself, but to the absence of self entirely. Not to a perfect life, but to the stillness that doesn't need one. Not to higher consciousness, but to the raw presence that was never born and never needed to evolve. Because awareness doesn't grow, it doesn't move, it doesn't need to learn or integrate or ascend. It just is, it always was. And in that remembering, the illusion of growth collapses, the loop dissolves, and what's left is real. Not because it's spectacular, not because it's dramatic, but because it's silent, and it doesn't require you to become, only to be. Look around. Your room, your apartment, your street, your city. It feels familiar, comfortable. Yours, you know where the light switch is, you know how the couch dips just slightly on the left side. You recognize the sound of the fridge kicking on at 2 a.m., the scent of your soap, the glow of your screen, and you think, this is my life. This is reality. But what if it's not? What if everything around you, every object, every symbol, every ritual, wasn't something you chose? What if your entire environment was built, layer by layer, with invisible intentions not your own? Not maliciously, not deliberately, but unconsciously. Because the world around you is not neutral. It's not just architecture, it's a language. And that language speaks control. It's a map, coded with assumptions about what matters, how life should feel, and who you are supposed to be. And the longer you live inside it, the more you forget it's a map. You begin to believe it's the territory. But it's not. It's a projection, a constructed theater. Let's start with your home. The furniture, the layout, the materials. Why does your living room have a couch? Why does your bedroom have a mirror? Why does your desk face that direction? You might think these are personal choices, but dig deeper and you'll find every piece has a cultural blueprint, a symbolic inheritance. The couch isn't just for sitting. It's a signal of comfort, family, leisure. The mirror isn't just for grooming. It's a symbol of self-recognition, appearance, identity, and your desk. It's positioned for productivity, attention, control. Each item whispers, this is how to be a person. And it doesn't stop at your walls. Step outside and the entire city is speaking. The roads, the signs, the branding, the architecture, the colors, the schedules, they all reinforce invisible beliefs. Order is good, speed is success, noise is normal. Time must be filled, progress is forward, comfort is consumption. You don't question these signals because you grew up inside them. They taught you how to interpret reality, not directly, but through symbolic suggestion. Your school bell didn't just signal class. It trained your nervous system to crave structure. Your plastic lunch tray didn't just hold food, it taught you standardization. The arrangement of cubicles in your first job didn't just organize people, it visually encoded hierarchy, status, surveillance. And slowly, the environment became your teacher, then your mirror, then your prison. But it's a beautiful prison. Soft edges, warm lighting, digital conveniences, the illusion of personalization, so you never think to question it. Why would you? It's all you've known. But here's the truth. The world outside is a replica of the assumptions inside. The city didn't create your beliefs. Your beliefs created the city. And now the city reflects them back to you, over and over, until it feels inevitable. You think the street leads somewhere, but it loops. Attention, it doesn't show you reality. It shows you the story the dream wants you to believe. And the most dangerous part? You helped build it. Not with hammers, with habits, with choices, with silent consent. You said yes every time. You didn't say no. You participated. And so the illusion isn't just external, it's internalized. The architecture of control isn't just in the walls, it's in your nervous system. It's in the way you flinch when someone speaks too loudly. It's in how you organize your day by productivity blocks. It's in how you sit, walk, eat, sleep. Every behavior mapped by the blueprint of a world you didn't design but fully inhabit. And now, it owns you, not as a tyrant, as a comfort, as a familiarity. And that's why you don't leave. Because leaving means disorientation. It means questioning not just your choices, but the frame of choosing itself. It means realizing that your sense of stability was borrowed. Your sense of identity was installed. Your freedom was curated. And if you let go of that architecture, what's left? Just you. Not the version trained by your environment, not the avatar who fits the space, but the raw, structureless awareness that was here before the room was named, before the streets had labels, before time was broken into hours. That you doesn't need walls, doesn't need rituals, doesn't need to know what's next. It only needs to see, and the moment it sees the architecture for what it is, not real but symbolic, you stop needing to fix the world. You stop trying to organize it. You stop believing the room defines the dreamer. And then, maybe for the first time, you can exit. Not physically, psychologically, energetically. You stop reacting to the symbols. You stop obeying the layout, your fear of the unknown. Because once you know it's a set, you don't need the role anymore. You can move through it, use it, even enjoy it, but not believe it, not worship it, not be controlled by it. That's the beginning of real freedom, not escaping your environment. Thought was holding you, was always empty, always yours, always waiting for you to see that you were never the occupant. You were the space itself. You remember it clearly, that moment, that breakthrough, that instant where everything clicked, everything softened, and the world stopped spinning. Maybe it happened during meditation, or while staring out the window, half lost in thought. Maybe it came during heartbreak, or laughter, or the silence right before sleep. But for just a breath, it felt like the veil dropped, like you had touched something real, something eternal. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. And ever since you've been trying to get back there, back to that feeling, that knowing, that peace. You try the same breathing exercise, the same mantra. You revisit the same mountain, the same book, the same silence. And sometimes it almost works, but it's never quite the same. The light is a little dimmer, the insight feels second-hand, the presence feels rehearsed, And deep down you wonder, what changed? Why can't I get it back? But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the real question is, was it ever really there? What if that moment was a mirage? Not fake, not meaningless, but a projection, a brief flash of light that seemed eternal because it stood out against your darkness. You called it awakening, you called it clarity, but maybe it was just contrast. And now your mind has turned it into a golden idol, a sacred fragment you've placed on the altar of memory, and you bow to it. You measure everything else against it. But here's the truth. The moment you remember, maybe not then. What exists is the memory of it, the story, the emotional echo, but not the thing itself, because moments aren't real, not in the way you think. You can't hold them. You can't keep them. They're made of time. And time slips. So when you change a moment, you're chasing a shadow, and no matter how fast or how faithfully you run, the shadow stays one step ahead. Because it was never a place to return to, it was a glimpse. A window. And maybe that's all it was ever meant to be. But the mind wants permanence, it wants to bottle the sacred, it wants to repeat the infinite. So it turns the moment into a goal, and suddenly you're no longer awake. You're seeking again, back on the path, back in the loop, back in the ache of almost. But what if that moment was never meant to last? What if it was there precisely because it would vanish? What if its value wasn't in returning, but in reminding you that stillness exists? Like real, that presence is possible, that behind the noise something real waits in silence. But it's not found by reaching backward. It's not recovered through replication. It's not stored in memory like a photo album. It's only here, now. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because if the moment you long for only ever existed here, and you're not here now, then what exactly are you chasing? A ghost? A dream of the past that pulls you away from the present. It seduces you with nostalgia, but nostalgia is just longing with a mask. A refusal to face the rawness of now without a script. Because the truth is, you don't want that moment. You want the feeling that moment gave you. And you believe that feeling is locked inside a time that's already gone. But it's not. It never was. Because that feeling didn't come from the moment, it came from your absence inside the moment. It came from not thinking, not grasping, not controlling, and that means it's still available not by chasing it, not by recreating it, but by dropping everything else. All your strategies, all your comparisons, all your attempts to get it back, let them fall, because the moment you're seeking is this one. But without the seeker, without the longing, without the story of what used to be. But the ego resists that. It says, that moment was special. It clings to it like a badge, because without that story, without that memory, it fears you'll have nothing. But that's the point. That's where the door opens. When you're willing to stand in the nothing, the moment you truly stop trying to get it back. There never was. Because awareness doesn't store experiences like files. It doesn't carry moments from place to place. It's always starting fresh. Always empty. Always still. That's why it felt sacred. Not because something new entered, but because you left. The grasping stopped. The commentary went silent. And in that absence the truth appeared not as an insight, as a space. But the moment you tried to hold it, define it, remember it, you re-entered the dream. You became the one who had a moment, and the moment became memory. But it wasn't lost. It was just disguised. Because the moment you're longing for has never left. It's just been covered by the search to find it. That's the paradox. You can't return to it, you can only stop leaving it. You don't go backward, you go deeper. Into the stillness that doesn't move, that doesn't change, that doesn't remember or forget. And that stillness, it's here now, not beneath anything, not behind some future breakthrough. just beneath your effort. So let it fall, let the story of the moment dissolve, let the chase stop, and watch what remains when there's no one left looking, because this is the moment you couldn't get back, not because it was lost, but because it was never separate. There's a voice inside your head, you know the one. It narrates everything. It labels, it judges, it plans, it replays. It never really turns off. Even when you lie in bed at night, lights off, body still, there it is, whispering. Sometimes gently, sometimes urgently. It comments on your day, your decisions, your regrets, your hopes. And if it's quiet, you can almost feel it waiting. Waiting for the next scene, the next line, the next thing to explain, and you think it's you call it yourself, because it sounds like your voice. It uses your language, your memories, your tone. But here's the question no one asks. What if that voice isn't you at all? What if it's not a tool you use, but a script that uses you? What if that voice is the dream itself, talking you deeper into the illusion? Because when you really look, you'll see something strange. You don't choose its words. You don't know where the thoughts come from, they just appear. On their own, you're not speaking them, you're hearing them, and you can't stop them. You try to meditate, to breathe, to silence the mind, and still it keeps talking, like a broken speaker stuck in loop, like an old radio signal you can't shut off. But that's not an accident, that voice. It's the engine of the dream, the constant narrator that keeps the illusion coherent. It fills in gaps, it gives events meaning. It creates a continuous you across time, and that illusion of continuity, that sense of being someone moving through life, isn't created by your body, it's created by that voice, because the moment it stops, everything collapses. Time, identity, narrative, the entire structure of me evaporates. That's why the voice never sleeps. It's not just a habit. It's the scaffolding of the self. It's what holds the mask in place, and so we protect it. We call it the inner guide, the inner analyst, the inner truth-teller. But more often than not, it's just the inner editor. It rewrites history. It spins events to protect the ego. It invents intentions after the action has already happened. It makes you feel like you're deciding things, but you're not. You're just hearing the explanation after the fact. The voice didn't witness your life. It invented it. And once you see that, everything shifts. Because now when you hear the voice say, "I can't believe I did that," you realize who is speaking. Who is I? What is this commentary trying to protect or reinforce or explain away? Most of the time, it's not speaking truth. It's speaking justification. It's retrofitting stories to preserve the illusion of a continuous self. And when it can't explain something, it hides it, distracts you, moves on. Because the voice doesn't want awareness. It wants coherence. It wants to keep you inside the lines, inside the role, inside the myth of progress and personal agency. But you don't need to believe it. You don't need to obey it. You don't even need to silence it. You just need to watch it. Watch it like you would watch a character in a film. Observe how it inserts itself into everything. I should have said more. I don't know if they like me. Maybe this will finally work. Each line is an act of attachment. Each line reinforces the script. But when you see it clearly, without resistance, the voice loses its grip. Because its power doesn't come from speaking, its power comes from being believed. That's the shift. Not from noise to silence, but from identification to witnessing. You stop thinking you're the voice. You realize you're the space it appears in. You're not the narrator. You're the silence underneath the narration. And that silence, it never left. It was always there. But you couldn't hear it over the script. The plot, the lines being whispered 24/7 in the theater of your skull. And here's the paradox. The voice will even comment on this. It'll say, I see now. I'm not the voice. I've figured it out. But that's still it. Still speaking, still playing both roles, problem and solution, still performing the identity of someone who realized something. So don't fight it. Don't try to kill it. Just recognize its game. It speaks to maintain someone. And that someone isn't real. It's a mask, animated by sound, by language, by commentary, and underneath it all, you remain. Not as a thought, not as an idea, but as stillness, as open space, as the one thing the voice can't imitate, because it has no shape, no sound, no conclusion. That's you. That's what's real. And once you rest there, the voice can keep talking, but it doesn't hook you anymore. It becomes background noise, like a commercial in another room. It might still spin stories, but the stories fall flat because the listener is gone, and in that absence, there's freedom. Not silence as in no words, but silence as in no belief, no attachment, no need to build the next sentence, just presence, empty, aware, and finally, awake. You've reached the end. At least it feels like the end. You've walked the path, asked the impossible questions, unraveled the dream layer by layer. You've seen the watcher behind the eyes, the silence behind the noise, the voice that never sleeps. And now, here you are, the final chapter, the final truth, the last turn of the spiral. But stop, take a breath, because there's something strange happening here. Somewhere inside you can already feel it, that low, subtle twist, like a déjà vu you can't shake, like you've stood in this exact place before, thought the same thought, reached the same revelation, and now it hits you. This is not the first ending. You've ended before. You've reached the truth before. You've woken up before. But the story kept going. The identity came back. The seeking resumed. The next layer appeared. And the question is no longer, what's the truth? The question is, why does the ending never stay? Why does every final insight give birth to another? Why does peace turn into effort? Why does freedom harden into identity again? You already know the answer, because the dream doesn't end. Not like a book, not like a movie. There's no final scene, no ultimate curtain call, because the idea of an ending is part of the illusion. The last loop is the one that tells you there's a last loop. The deepest trick the dream plays is convincing you there's something to complete, some final resolution, some ultimate awakening, a clean break between asleep and awake. But awakening isn't a destination, it isn't an event, it isn't a climax in the plot. Awakening is what remains when the need for resolution dies. Because that need, that thirst for a clean ending, that's the final mask of the self. The seeker who wants to hang up the sword, say, I made it, and finally rest. But there's no made it. There's only the dropping of the one who ever thought they were going somewhere. Because the character can't wake up. Only the illusion of the character can dissolve. And what's left isn't a new person, or of perfect silence, or a state of bliss that lasts forever. What's left is reality, unpackaged, unpredictable, unlabeled. It doesn't promise anything. It doesn't clap when you arrive, because there is no arrival. There never was. The moment you stopped seeking, you were already here. You always were, you just didn't recognize it, because it didn't feel final enough. It didn't feel special enough. You were looking for fireworks. But truth isn't loud. It's subtle. It's silent. It's not an ending you can narrate. It's the end of narration itself. And maybe that's what makes it so difficult. Because you can't carry it in memory. You can't package it as a story. You can't post about it or teach it. It doesn't make you better or wiser or more enlightened. It just makes you no one. And in that emptiness, you stop looping. Not because you figured it out, but because you no longer need to. The dream may continue. Sensations, thoughts, emotions. Sure, they still arise, but they no longer add up to you. They no longer accumulate into a story. Because the one who wanted resolution is gone, burned up in the final loop that wasn't final. And that's the freedom. Not that everything ended, but that the seeking ended, that subtle tension of almost, that whisper of not quite there. It dies, because there never existed. Only this, only now, only the raw, unfiltered immediacy of this breath, this feeling, this awareness, with no need to tie it up with a bow, because truth doesn't need an ending, only stories do. And the truth is, you're not a story. You're not a plot. You're not a narrative unfolding across time. You're the space it unfolds in, the screen the film plays on. And the moment you stop watching for a conclusion, the projector goes quiet, the loop dissolves, not because it finished, but because you stopped believing there was ever a circle. There was just movement, and now, stillness. Not because you earned it, but because you stopped trying. And in that stopping, the whole illusion folds. No applause, no achievement, no voice saying you did it. Just this, just now, just the ordinary, unremarkable mystery of being, which in truth was never ordinary. It was just overlooked, because you were waiting for something else, something bigger, something brighter. But the miracle was always this, not the final chapter, not the answer, not the insight, just being itself, free from needing to mean anything, free from needing to finish, free from needing to become. So, if you're still waiting for the last piece to fall into place, stop. If you're still measuring your awakening by how long it lasts, stop. If you're still looking for a moment that makes it all make sense, stop. Because the moment doesn't come. You do. When you return to now, to here, to what never left, and that is the end. Not because the loop closed, but because the one running it disappeared. No final bow, no final scene, no final anything. Just freedom, not as a state, but as the absence of needing one. So let this be the last loop, not because it completes something, but because you no longer need it to.